AIS Play รวมความบันเทิงคุณภาพเปิดความสนุกทุกที่ทุกเวลา
ส่งต่อความมั่นใจสู้ไปด้วยกันนะครับ
No pacemakers. This is not about times. It's about gold, silver and bronze. Great field, and I'm joined by Martin Gillingham. I'm Rob Walker, and Martin, the two Japanese athletes in particular will fancy they can produce a little piece of history here. No Japanese man has won this title, surprisingly, since 1986, and Hiroto Inui and Hayata Sonada are both class acts in this race.
Yes, you mentioned there 1986 and Takayuki Nakayama, the time he recorded in winning that title all that time ago, more than 3 decades ago. 2:08.21 remains the fastest time we've seen in an Asian Games marathon. That's pretty quick in all honesty. That achieved in Seoul. You've only got to look here at the skies just to get a sense of just quite how oppressive the heat is here. We're very close to the central business district, despite there being a lot of greenery around. It is a stunning campus of sporting facilities here. We've got the, just to the left there, we have the aquatic centre and a number of the other sports are taking place just on the periphery here of the main stadium, which is a stunning structure. Inside here, it really is tremendous. But as we take a look here at the route, now it is essentially an out and back course with a sharp hairpin bend at the end. It is 2 circuits. There's the main stadium. There's a little bit tagged on the end there. But we do take in some of the finest features of the city of Jakarta.
Yes, the Selamat Datang Monument. We've got the National Monument just halfway up the first circuit of 10K. But there'll be some nervous faces there. You can see 1 or 2 of the Japanese athletes there just talking to himself. 4:77, that's Hayata Sonada. 2:09.34 in Oita earlier this year. 71st in the World Half Marathon Championships in pretty warm conditions in Valencia at the end of March. 4:65, Hiroto Inui. Inui is the 2nd fastest Asian in the world this year, 25 years of age, 5th in Tokyo for his PB and 26th in the London World Championships last year. So he will be on paper the favourite, but watch out for a couple of very useful Bahrainians. Abdi Abdo, who was 2nd in Rome in a PB of 2:08.32 earlier this year, and El Hassan El Abbasi, his compatriot, 15th in the World Cross a few years ago in Guiyang. I was there in China for that one. Tough conditions there as well. It's a good lineup, this, and I really like these major championship races, Martin, because it isn't about the clock. It's cagey. You're not going to get a 2:04 plus change that you'd expect from an Eliud Kipchoge in Berlin. This is a true, pure race, and taking gold in this event will mean a great deal to every one of the 21 guys lining up.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's a feature of track and field as a whole. The sport has become a slave to fast times, and that has meant that really anything from even 800 metres up, pacemakers have become the norm over the course of the last 3 or 4 decades. Same case in the marathons and the major city marathons, and that very important skill of racing has taken something of a back seat. And that means that, particularly these days, there is such a thing as a racing animal, and that's a unique talent when you can bring that to a championship like this. Run very early in the morning, and let's face it, this is a small field. We've only got 20 odd out there, and yes, many of these men are used to running first thing in the morning. It is 6 o'clock in the morning local time here. That a necessity in these conditions. But for 1 or 2 people out there, they will revel in this. I don't think anyone will revel in the climatic conditions, but the conditions of the race. Pure racing, that's what it's all about.
I'm really looking forward to this one. We've been here for a little while. We've had some great other sport going on. Now, for those who are true athletics fans, a very special day as part of the 18th edition of the Asian Games here in Jakarta. 197, that was Dong Gujian just on the left of picture waving. There are one or two people here. We'll be over there in the stadium very soon for the start of the track program. Here we go though. The men's marathon begins a lap of the stadium here in the Gelora Bung Karno Arena. Finished in 1961. Ready for the first time the Indonesians played host to the Asian Games. A very different scenario then, just 17 countries, 13 sports, as opposed to what have we got now? 40 sports, 67 disciplines, over 450 gold medals. And the very first on the athletics program will be awarded in around about, 2 hours and 10 minutes time. One of the Thailand athletes going to the front, just deciding to push the pace. We get a complete lap in the stadium at the beginning and then 3/4 of a lap at the very end of the race. And it'll take around about 1 kilometre of running to get on to the 10-kilometre up and back loop, which they do twice. 10 up to the turn point, 10 back. Repeat before they edge towards the stadium. That is in fact 793. Tony Artit Payne, born in New Zealand and now representing Thailand. He's got a best time of just inside 2:20, so he was just deciding that the pace in the first couple 100 metres was too slow, but it'll be pretty cagey, I imagine, Martin, for the first section of this race, because you don't win the marathon in the first 10k, especially in these humid conditions. It's relatively cool now, but it's 6 o'clock in the morning. It won't take long before the humidity and the intensity of the atmosphere begins to take effect on these athletes. These conditions will be brutal.
Now they will be, and Payne, you can see, just easing down on the accelerator pedal, and I'm not sure anybody will be grateful for that. Moving out of the stadium here, so onto the streets and the start of that 10-kilometre up and down route, 2 complete loops. And in such a small field, it'll be interesting to see whether little pods of athletes do develop, because many of these men will do much of their preparation for all races going out and running at this time of day. And so they will be well used to clocking up the miles on their own. However, clocking up the miles at something like a traditional 5-minute mile pace, or somewhere just a little around 3 kilometres or 3 minutes a kilometre, which is something like the race pace, just to give you some sort of idea of the pace they're moving at. Well, if you want to run about 2:10, which is probably a fairly reasonable stab at the winning time today, you are clocking an average of round about 3 minutes a kilometre.
I always like it when you see people running along the side of the course when you watch a big city marathon, and generally they're sprinting and waving at the motorbike cameras, and they can usually only keep up for about 200 or 300 metres, if that. That gives you an indication as to just how fast elite marathon runners are these days, because when they're running along in a pack, it's sometimes difficult at home to get a sense of just how fast they are. But they're not jogging, they are properly running. Amazing at such an early time on a Saturday morning to see a fair number of people already out with their mobile phones ready to get the all-important snap. I think we could see quite a few people gathered along this section of the road when they come back in over 2 hours' time for the finish.
Yes, you talk about the mobile phones. I don't think I've been to a city in the world where I've seen more people walking around just simply looking at mobile phones than I have in Jakarta over the course of the last week. So here's the leading group. Yeah, just to get an idea again of the sort of tempo that these fellas are running at. Get onto the treadmill in the gym and whack it up to something like 20 kilometres an hour. And that might have you hanging on the back. You won't find many treadmills at your local gym, that'll actually go any faster than 20 kilometres an hour, but that's what they're doing. They really are shifting, but one of the talents of natural athletes who can turn their legs over fast is that they can make that look relatively comfortable. And these distance runners, compare them with the pure sprinting animals that you'll see on the track later in the day. Well, they don't have anything like the same leg speed. However, their enormous talent, and this is because of the efficiency of the heart and lungs and all that sort of stuff, is that they can run so close to maximum pace, make it look relaxed, and just churn out mile after mile after mile, kilometre after kilometre, and do it with such apparent ease.
Metronomic is the word that springs to mind when you watch the might of the East Africans. We got a glimpse there of Mohamed Shifaz of the Maldives drifting off the back of that pace. Not really too surprising. He made an appearance at the World Half Marathon Championships earlier this year, finished 141st, a national record in 74 minutes. So we wouldn't necessarily have expected him to live with the 2:10, 2:11 pace that we would expect from the winners. So one or two already deciding quite sensibly, perhaps, in these sticky conditions to run at their own pace. 5:88, Ilya Tyapkin of Kyrgyzstan. He's been setting the pace, along with Kostebekov, his compatriot, alongside him. So the two men from Kyrgyzstan. 5:83. He was an Asian Championship bronze medalist last year, over 10,000 metres. There are quite a few men here making their debut over the marathon distance, many of whom have graced the podium of previous Asian Games and Asian Championships on the track over 5 and 10.
The other thing that it's fair to assume here, Rob, is that there are going to be a number of men here. We've been running 6-7 minutes, something like that. We'll be looking across and thinking, hang on, this is a bit sharp, because if you look at the times that these athletes are capable of, there is such a range, yet we have a small number. And 3 minutes on the road, well, that's a kilometre. That's getting through to the end. So at some point, this leading group is going to split up, and there will be some men already in this leading group who, I can tell you, will be asking serious questions of themselves and thinking, how much longer can I sustain this?
And there's a very long way to go if they're feeling like that. One athlete we haven't mentioned, Pak Choi, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He's in that group, 5th in the Asian Games marathon 4 years ago, 11th in the World Championships in Beijing. Both Martin and I were there, working for different broadcasters. Conditions were brutal, so the man from the People's Republic of Korea, just sitting in that pack, is well used to tough conditions. That's the two Nepalese athletes just off the back there, Basnet 6:39 and Parky 6:40 and 7:93. Tony Payne, born in New Zealand, now representing Thailand once again at the front, as he was inside the stadium, albeit briefly.
Now, he's a 2:19 man. And yes, it is early days, and of course he can keep up with this sort of pace. But he knows in the back of his mind, unless he's been holding something back over the early part of his track and field career, that the men in this field who are capable of running 2:9 and 2:10, they are 3 kilometres faster than him over 42.2. So if he wants to still be out there in 2 hours' time, at some point he's going to have to make a decision, because by following the pace so early here in this small field, if you are uncomfortable, you're going to end up in some distress by the time you get into the second half of this race. Wouldn't surprise me if fairly soon we do start to see the pods developing, and the 2.6 and the 2.7 and the 2.8 men going out in front. Those perhaps who are more 2.12, 2.13 will start to drop back. That's the sensible way of racing this. Otherwise, we certainly won't get 20-odd people completing this course.
Yeah, inevitably there will be one or two who fail to finish. Abdi Abdel, I just spotted him in the middle of the pack. We haven't spoken much about him the Bahrainian, who broke his PB and ran 2:08.5, finishing second in Rome, fourth in the Youth Olympics over 3,000 metres in Nanjing 4 years ago. I was there working on that event. A certain Yomif Kajelcha won that 3,000 metres, and how he's gone on to make an impact globally over the 3 and the 5, the very distinctive, tall, skinny Ethiopian. So Abdi Abdo is a very good talent. He's only 21 years of age. He's in that lead pack. That's the man from the Maldives, who we've already mentioned, Mohammed Shifaz. He's off the pace, and the two men from Nepal running just to the back on the right-hand side. They've obviously decided to race together, perhaps heeding some of the words that Martin Gillingham was just saying about running the marathon at your own pace. They were first and second in the Kathmandu marathon in 2:22 and 2:25, so very sensibly the Nepalese duo running at their own pace off the back. And I'd be surprised if they didn't have a few athletes to pick off towards the second half of the race. Discretion is the better part of valour when it comes to running a marathon. At whatever pace, you've got to start conservatively, because when the wheels come off in the last 4 or 5 miles, they can do so in spectacular fashion if you have got the early part of your pacing wrong.
Indeed. A number of these athletes naturally will do most of their running work in conditions, if not quite like this, but fairly similar, in particularly humid conditions. It still doesn't mean that this is where they will run fast. If they want to run fast, they will, by and large, go to the big cities or run certainly in the cooler times of the year. But you mentioned Abdo there, the youngster, just 21. Now, I do reckon that if you'd have gone back to 1986 to Seoul, when Nakayama ran that Games record of 2:08.21, I'd be surprised if there was a top flight 21-year-old in that field. That's part of the changing face of marathon running. It's been a feature particularly in East Africa, whether we're talking the Ethiopians or perhaps more pertinently the Kenyans. These days, you get a lot of youngsters, 20, 21, 22, running fast marathon times. I mean, the old way of approaching marathons, if we go back to the 60s and the 70s, many of the marathon runners, not all of them, had come from a track background. Remember the great Emil Zatopek? We're going back 60, 70 years now. But he would win 5s and 10Ks and then go out and run the marathon. But they're athletes who would perhaps leave the marathon until the back end of their careers, when they were more mature athletes, maybe when a little bit of the sting had gone out of the leg speed, when they were in the late 20s into their early 30s, more and more, particularly among the East Africans. And I think the commercial element of the sport is driving a lot of this, quite naturally. But men in their early 20s, bypassing the track, some of them, perhaps they're not quite as sharp as some of their teammates over the 5 and 10K, and they go straight to the roads. And they do it with some success. Now, Abdo there, Bahrain, you can just see him towards the back of that leading group, but he should be fairly comfortable at this sort of pace here. But just 21, still very early in his track and field career.
It is incredible these days. You're right. When you watch marathon runners, and some of them are even teenagers, I'm pretty sure that the world's best for a teenager is something ridiculous, like 2:05 plus change. You almost wonder where that stamina comes from, because the traditional route, which some of the latest generation and some of the all-time greats have done that. Look at Haile Gebrselassie, 5 and 10,000 metre world record holder, double Olympic champion over the 10, and the first man in history under 2:04. Paul Tergat preceded him as world record holder, followed him home in Atlanta and in Sydney over the 10,000 metres. He was the first man under 2:05. But you do wonder, when you come across a teenager or a 20 or 21-year-old with no track pedigree whatsoever, you just wonder how on earth they can get that amount of stamina in their legs, because it is such a natural progression. You do 5, you do 10, and as you say, you get to 30, 31, and you think, right, I've done with the track, now I'm going to have a look on the road. It's extraordinary. And when you look at the world's top lists at the moment, you've got hundreds of men running inside 2:10. I mean, from the Asian point of view, sub 2:10 puts you in with a shout in this race. There are 4 or 5 men. The 2 Japanese have run really well inside 2:10. And Abdo, who we've mentioned, who's back in the pack, wearing bib 121 if you want to keep an eye out for him. There he is, just towards the rider picture, 2:08.32. Sub 2:10 is still an excellent time, but in global terms, there are probably in excess of 70 or 80, maybe even 100 Ethiopians and Kenyans who've gone inside 2:10. The standard at the moment on a global level is absolutely extraordinary. Just to give you an indication, Abdi Abdo is the 4th fastest Asian athlete in the world this year with that 2:08.32. That 2:08.32 puts him joint 55th on the current world leaderboard. That is how much the standards have risen globally and particularly from East Africa over the last 15 or 20 years. And still this duo from Kyrgyzstan sharing the lead. Tiapkin, 5.88 on the left, very heavy strapping beneath that left knee. And I noticed he was tapping his right thigh around about 5 or 6 minutes ago. 5.83, Adilet Shishtabikov. He was 9th in the Asian Games in the 1500 metres 4 years ago. So he's decided to step up to the marathon. I'm pretty sure it's his debut. I was looking him up on an excellent website that statisticians like Martin and myself use called
You can speak for yourself, Rob.
called Telastapaya. a great website. I've whiled away many a dark hour in my hotel room. No, I haven't really. So I'm pretty sure the man from Kyrgyzstan, the former 1500 metre runner, who has run 66 plus bits for the half marathon wearing 5.83, I'm pretty sure if it says in Telastapaya it's his debut, then it's his debut. So what a way and what a context in which to mark your first marathon, the Asian Games here in Jakarta.
And we were talking there about the different sort of racing beast that is now excelling in the marathon now that we're down to times of 2:02, 2:03. I mean, Haile Gebrselassie, who was the man really who took the marathon, I think, into another generation or another era, perhaps is the best word, ahead of his time. I mean, here was a man who I once saw running a sub 4-minute mile on a treadmill. Now, if you go back 15, 20 years, and in my athletics life, I mean, AD year 1 is probably somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s. And I mean, let's look at the first ever world marathon champion, Rob de Castella, the great Deke, the Australian. Now, he was running really, really first world-class times. Now, for instance, he won the Rotterdam Marathon, 1983, so that's the year that he went on to winning that world title. Ran 2:08.37. Now, he beat a world-class field. Alberto Salazar, now associated with being a coach, but people forget that he, in his pomp, was the best marathon runner in the world. Carlos Lopez, who won the Olympic title in the marathon in 1984. They were all behind De Castella that day in Rotterdam. De Castella won in 2 hours, 8 minutes, 37. It was the 4th fastest time in history back then. Now, where would 2:08.37 get you these days? It wouldn't get you in the top 5 of some of these almost second tier but high-class major city marathons. And there are a number of reasons for that. The evolution of the sport, let's be honest, greater professionalism, but simply we've now got a different sort of racing animal. We've got men who've got great leg speed. To be a world-class marathon runner these days, you've got to be able to run a decent mile, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. The times are extraordinary, and we do well to remember just how fast those men are. Yeah, if you're a half-decent club runner, you might look to run a 1,500 metres in maybe, I'm not talking anywhere near a national standard, 4:05, 4:10, 4:20. You'd have to run that again and again and again and again to stand a chance. Most half-decent runners could do a mile, maybe 2 if they're really good and they're towards the top end of their club, and then after 2 miles, their race would be over. It's amazing the standard that's produced these days, and yet, Martin, there's still a great opportunity for an athlete who can run 2:7, 2:8 but can't go faster, but that opportunity now only comes in a major championship where it's not about time. Eliud Kipchoge is arguably, I think, the greatest marathon runner in history already, even though some would balk at that and say, well, hang on a minute, he hasn't successfully defended the Olympic title. I think, injuries notwithstanding, he'll have a very good chance of doing so in Tokyo. The slowest marathon he's ever run by far was Rio in 2016 when he won the title in 2:08 plus change, because the first half of the race was slow. He recognised it wasn't about time, it was about winning the title. So there are still opportunities for athletes who can't get inside 2:07, but they will only come during a major championship now.
When you mentioned there Kipchoge, I mean, what background has he come from? He won a world title, I think it was in Paris.
At the age of 19.
That's right. Winning a world title on the track. So here's a man who's got tremendous leg speed.
Kish Tabikov there, just deciding to go off the front. He and his compatriot, Tyapkin, from Kyrgyzstan, have been dominating the pace so far, and they've clearly had a bit of a plan. But remember, the 25-year-old is making his marathon debut. And now we're beginning to see, we've already had one or two drifting off the back. Shifaz of the Maldives was the first to drop off, and we got the two Nepalese, first and second in the Kathmandu Marathon. They're off the back as well. There they are, in fact. But rather than having a big pack of, 18 or 19 together, we've now got a little bit single file. There's an arrow forming, and they're all trailing behind Adilet Shishtabikov at the moment, 5.83. 5.74 is Shin of Korea, 65th in the World Championships last year in London, inside 2:30. So he's a relatively consistent marathon performer.
Just look on some of those shots, Rob. You can see almost the murk and the mist, and that is the humidity in the air. I do remember going back to 2008, and there was, let's be honest, a pollution problem in Beijing, whatever they did at the Olympic Games there in 2008. You wake up in some mornings, and there were some tall buildings, you couldn't see the top of them. Now, we don't have those sort of conditions here in Jakarta. However, it's very, very humid. It's very, very muggy. I'm a little bit comforted to see one or two there of the flags and the banners are just moving a little bit. That's the first I've seen of any flags or banners doing that this week. It's been very, very still. The conditions have been like that day after day after day. And these men going off at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's now just short of 25 past 6 in the morning local time here in Indonesia. This is out of necessity. This, even for many of these men who are fairly well associated with these sort of, or acquainted with these sort of conditions, are going to find it incredibly tough.
I think we will see some casualties of the pace towards the end. By the way, back right of picture, 4.65, Hiroto Inui, the second fastest year, floating along at the back of that group. And at the front, there's a little bit of an exchange going on. That was quite funny. 8.36 is Andrei Petrov from Uzbekistan. And he came up onto the shoulder of the two men from Kyrgyzstan, and they shared a little bit of a joke there. So it's obviously a good-natured race. But 4.65 now on the left of your frame there, running on his toes, looking like he's jogging.
I was going to make exactly the same point. He runs like a track runner, doesn't he? He's up on his toes. I think there are one or two coaches out there, certainly those from the old school, will say, look, that's not particularly economical. But you've only got to look at his capabilities. 2:06.54 early this year, ran that in the Tokyo Marathon. On the right-hand side, look at that. Now, he could be running a track session.
How can he do that for 26.2? On his toes, that's incredible.
Compare that. Look around some of the other athletes here.
Well, look at Petrov, 8.36. Heel strike first. Completely different style, isn't it?
Yeah, one thing that's an interesting point is some people say that watch a runner, he's always on his toes, never using his heels. You actually run down the road and try and run without touching your heels on the ground. It's actually a bit of a myth. However, What is absolutely right and quite clear is that our man Inui there, who comes here as the fastest man in the field, we're just going to whistle past him there. He's running on the side. He is quite definitely a man who is up on his toes. He's a very, very different racing animal, for instance, in comparison with that man there out in front. Who's making the first move, but Rob, this is so early in the race. In a championship race, in a small field, in conditions like this. Inui you can see on the right-hand side towards the back there. He's got the right idea. I would suggest any man kicking from the front after just 25 minutes on his feet. He's been going 5 miles using the old imperial distances. You don't want to be doing that on a day like this.
You know, he's done that before. Getting a glimpse there of Hiroto Inui, 5th in Tokyo in February for that PB. It's Surod Bhattacharya of Mongolia. Just missed a medal 4 years ago in Incheon. I've really enjoyed watching him in various editions of the World Championship. I think the reason he's gone to the front twice is to make sure he's first at the drink stations. He's 36 years of age now, the Mongolian, running, can you believe this, bearing in mind we've got 1 or 2 in this field making their marathon debuts. I counted up on that statistician's website last night. The Mongolian leading is racing his 56th marathon. He's competed in 4 consecutive Olympic Games. I think his best is 51st in London. A man of immense experience as we focus once again on Inui. 36 in a World Half Marathon Championships, half marathon PB of 61.5. So he is the complete package as a marathon runner. And his economy of motion is brilliant as the Mongolian decides to lead. And for the first time, we do actually get a little glimpse from Abdi Abdo, who at the moment is just running in the shadow of the Mongolian, wearing 121. You can just see him bobbing around a little bit. 28th in the World Junior Cross. Only running his 3rd marathon as opposed to the Mongolian in his 56th. I mean, 56 marathons is extraordinary.
I think it's probably fair to say that he's gone through his peak. Now, he might have plateaued, which is what you want to do when you're running that number of marathon races. But you would have thought you just about squeezed everything out of yourself in terms of reaching the top of your potential and capability. There's Inui right at the back. He's doing just the right thing at the moment. Allow others to do the work. We saw Tony Payne put the first little bit of bite in as he went out of the stadium. He's struggling at the back of this field, or the back of the leading group at the moment. Bear in mind, though, he's a 2:19 athlete, and 2:19 as opposed to Inui. I mean, that's the difference between a world-class international marathon runner and frankly somebody who's very, very good, because 2:19, believe me, is not shabby, but that's almost a weekend warrior, top of the class weekend warrior marathon time. Different class entirely, 13 minutes. I mean, that's 3 or 4 kilometres on the road by the time you've gone through 42.2. You can see Payne at the back there, just taking a look on his watch on his left wrist. I bet you he's looking at that and thinking, I'm going out quite quick here. At some point, I'm going to have to take a breather. Hard man at the front, though, isn't he? Look at him.
And he's been checking his watch repeatedly. 5:88. It is Ilya Tyapkin, 8th in the Asian Championship Marathon last year. Competed at the Olympics as well. 85th in 2:23 in Rio a couple of years ago. They were tough conditions as well. Not as humid as this, but it was sticky in Rio, which I think was one of the most dominant pieces of marathon running I've ever seen. It was as if Eliud Kipchoge held that whole field on a piece of string. He toyed with them for the first half of the race, and when he took off inside the last 13 miles, there was only ever going to be one winner. It was an extraordinary run from the Kenyan. No Kenyans here, though. This is about the cream of Asia's male distance running fraternity. A very prestigious title on the line for one of these men. 198, just loping along. Duo Buji of China, he also competed in Rio. He was 90th. He's twice finished 5th in the Asian Championships over 5,000 metres, so he is one of the more traditional marathon runners, coming up through the 5 and 10 and then graduating to the marathon. Tall, loping figure.
Yeah, you talk about this being a prestigious title. I think that was perhaps best illustrated in the pool last night. Sun Yang, he's a man who's won 3 Olympic titles. He's a man who's top of the tree. His targets are greater, if you like, than the Asian Games. But his mother and his father were in the stand last night. He won his 4th gold medal. That was his 9th in his Asian Games career. And he was welling up before he left the pool. So when you look back over an athlete's career, whether he be a swimmer or whether he be a track and field runner, yes, it's not necessarily the Asian Games achievements that will look as maybe characterising their success. However, in the heart, in the soul, this means a huge amount to athletes from Asia. And as we saw from Sun last night, well, the tears don't necessarily flow when he wins a world title or even an Olympic title, but they were spontaneous from all 3 family members after he won his 4th Asian title in the pool. So for these men, whoever comes through in front today, whoever is still out in front after a little more than maybe 2 hours and 10 minutes, this will be the peak, the moment of their careers.
Hey, because the Asian Games, it's representing an entire continent, isn't it? You're representing your country, but you're also showing the world, because there will be people from outside Asia watching these races on the road, in the pool. It's an advert for the region, as well as a battle for supremacy with arch rival nations. And actually, if Hiroto Inui does win, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a huge amount of emotion from him, bearing in mind no Japanese man has won it since Nakayama back in 1986, which is hard to believe, really, considering how big a place marathon running holds in the Japanese psyche. The marathons in Tokyo will be absolutely incredible. That's Andrei Petrov from Uzbekistan. Ran 2:15 for 15th place in Seoul earlier this year. He got a bronze in the Asian Championships over 10,000 metres a few years ago. But he has a habit of not finishing big marathons. Didn't finish Incheon 4 years ago and didn't finish in Rio either. But going back to Inui, he's now running halfway up that pack. As we're looking at it now, he's moved over to the left, just over the shoulder of 588. Who is Tyatkin from Kyrgyzstan. So Inui has swapped sides. And we haven't really mentioned Sonoda, his compatriot, who's also gone comfortably inside 2:10 this year, 29-year-old. He's running wearing bib 477 with the baseball cap. As almost on cue, as if he's been listening to us. So we can see him. There he is on the left-hand side, Inui. I just cannot believe. I mean, there's a long way to go and a lot can still happen, and there are other great men in here, but he is making this current pace look ridiculously easy at the moment.
Yes, again, I mean, the old aficionados of marathon coaching would look at him and say, well, he does look more like a 3,000 metre runner, maybe a 5,000 metre runner, but again, that serves to illustrate the different sort of running machines that are all real problems there at the drinks tables. And bear in mind, this is a small field, and this is where maybe a little bit of inexperience at the top class plays a part. And the man there is a veteran of 250 marathons or however many he's run. Well, he got himself at the front again, stuck in a little kick, made sure that the bottle with his name on it was there to be grabbed. But there were 1 or 2 people there stopping and breaking their stride and in danger of falling over one another's feet. So maybe, I think the etiquette of getting a drinks from the drinks table as we go to that hairpin bend.
Well,
The nature, sorry, Rob. I mean, the nature of this route is also a bit of a challenge for the athletes because it is out and back. It is long, straight lengths of road. They'll be staring into the distance, and if you've ever done that in one of your training runs, if you're a decent runner and do a lot of this sort of stuff, you'll know sometimes how disheartening it can be to be running on a long straight road because you fix your eyes on a target in front. It never seems to get any closer, or at least it doesn't for quite a while. So that's something these men have got to cope with. But that drinks table has broken things up just a little bit.
Yeah, it has. And you know, if those splits are accurate, if that time at 10K is accurate at just inside 34 minutes, I think that would explain why Bhattacharya has decided to go so hard, because I make that around about 2:30 pace.
Yeah, maybe a little bit quicker, but not much.
Which is slow by all these men's standards. So I think Bhattacharya has a tactic anyway of giving himself a clean run to get his own specific nutrition. I think if those splits are accurate, and I'm fairly sure they are, he's decided, listen, 2:30, I know I can bang out a marathon much quicker than this. I think his lifetime best, he's gone inside 2:10, not for a while. His season's best is 2:15 in Tokyo. I think that explains why, on receiving the news that that was the time they'd gone through 10K, he decided, okay, enough's enough. Yes, it's one thing to run conservatively, but no one's going to do anything with 2:30. I'm going off the front. 5:83 is Kyastabekov from Kyrgyzstan, making sure he gets his drink, and he's somehow ended up in that second pack, and they have splintered quite significantly and very quickly. The Mongolian has decided to take this race by the scruff of the neck because in his mind, 2:30 pace at 10K, there's one thing running conservatively, he's obviously decided that's far too slow.
Yeah, I've got to be honest, Rob, I've got one or two suspicions about that. I mean, this event tends to be run in pretty fierce conditions. 2006 in Doha, they were tough. Mubarak Shami, the man who represents Qatar, although he was or is a former Kenyan, he ran 2:12.44, and I seem to remember the following year he went on and won the Paris Marathon, did Shami. So he was top grade, but in pretty fierce conditions he ran 2:12. The slowest time that we've had win this race since Nakayama ran 2:08.21 in Seoul was one of the most famous winners of this race, Lee Bongju, who he ran 2:14.04 when he won in 2002. Now I know again that's 16 years ago and the event has moved on, but so it does go to show that pretty fierce conditions can have an impact. But I mean, these are tough, but I don't think when we get to the finish they're going to be 2:30 tough. I still fancy we're going to have a winner in the two teens somewhere. I mean, 2:14, 2:15, something like that. I mean, it's entirely possible, and it would be, of course, Rob, very, very sensible if the smarter, the more capable marathon runner here decide to go out and try and run a negative split. Even if in the end he didn't run a negative split because things got really hard in the last, 5, 10K, something like that. But he goes out as comfortable as he can afford for the opening half, and then starting to put his work in on what is our second loop here, because this is an out and back course, but it is essentially two loops of 20 kilometres with a bit tagged on. So, and you can see the man there, the fastest man in the field, Hiroto Inui, up on his toes like he's out running a morning jog, looking more like an 800-metre runner doing a warm-up than a marathon runner in a championship race. I'm sure that's his tactic. Just go out there, go with whatever pace it is. It can be as slow as he likes as far as he's concerned, because he's going to put the work in the second half.
Yeah, he looks very, very comfortable. Bhattacharya, the Mongolian, had a little look over his shoulder a couple of times, actually, as if to say, come on, everybody, let's up the pace a little bit. the most brutal marathon I can ever remember covering, and I do love the marathon for so many different reasons. There's just such great stories. It's like the most intense physical version of chess you could possibly get. Osaka 2007, the unknown Luke Kibet, I think, took the gold medal, and in second place I think was Sharmi, but he was absolutely broken. I'm fairly sure Luke Kibet won that world title in 2007 in a time that wasn't far inside 2:20, maybe 2:16, 2:17, which is unheard of for a World Championship gold medal. But when the conditions are tough, the times do take some punishment in terms of getting slower for the gold medal, but you really do earn it when it's that brutal. I remember the Swedish commentary box were down to just their pants. It was the first... Honestly, it was so hot, even the commentators were beginning to strip off.
It's quite funny you mention that, because I was in Osaka in 2007, and I think I arrived there on the Thursday or the Friday. It started on the Saturday, and I don't expect anyone out there to feel any sympathy for commentators, and believe me, you have no reason to. However, perhaps on that single day, the Saturday, the opening session started very early in the morning. I think it was possibly the marathon on the first morning.
Yeah.
And we had to sit there, go through the marathon, and then the opening session. So we started at the crack of dawn, whatever it was, 6, 7 in the morning. And we were still there doing a morning session, because it was also, I think, the first day of the decathlon. And we were there till about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there were people in the commentary box, some of the more elderly members of our fraternity, who were seriously battling. And those conditions there were ferocious, because you had the heat and you had the sort of humidity that we're experiencing this week in Jakarta. In Jakarta it's hot, 30 degrees, but it's not quite in the same league as it was there in Osaka in 2007. I mean, you and I mean, Berlin European Championships just a couple of weeks ago. Got very hot middle of the week. We had a couple of days in the middle 30s there. But nothing like the humidity. I mean, that's really is a tough combo. But I think, again, we do have to stress and make the point. The majority of the athletes here spend much of their year in same or similar-ish conditions to this. Particularly, this is where, if we go back in a championship competition, remember Athens in 2004, Mizuki Noguchi winning that almost desperate women's marathon in Athens, which Paula Radcliffe wouldn't care to be reminded of. But there we saw athletes from Asia coming into their prime. Noguchi there winning that women's marathon. So there will be somebody out here who thrives in these conditions, who, I'm not saying they're going to be enjoying it, but will somehow get through it and run a pretty decent and pretty quick time. But we've still got in that group, Rob, we've got athletes here whose realistic targets are 2:15, 2:16, and the man at the front there who probably knows even today is capable, if he needs to, of running inside 2:10. So at some point that leading group is going to splinter, and I think they've got to be wary of the fact they're going to spend a long time over the next 2 hours, perhaps on their own.
Yes, it's getting to the stage now where we are seeing a few people drift off the back. 197 is Dong, national champion for China, 2:14 plus change. I think there's 10 in that group if you include Dong, who is just allowing a metre or so to grow between himself and Shin, 5.74 from Korea Republic. He was 65th in the World Championships last year with 2:29. But as far as the race is concerned, both men from Japan, we've got Inui in that group, so too Sonada. This is the group of chasers. This is the view back up the road. 5.65, that's Kim of Korea Republic. 2.13, 11th in Seoul. He's trying to bridge that gap. He's in no man's land between the two packs. This is the second group, which interestingly contains Tiapkin of Kyrgyzstan, 5.88, who was leading for so much of the race early on, and Tony Payne, who we've mentioned a couple of times, 5.73 now drifting off the back. So we've got two very distinct packs here. And the key, as far as our enjoyment of the race is concerned, Martin, both men from Japan looking good. We've got the veteran Bhattacharya of Mongolia in this group, the very useful man from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Pak Choi, and also his compatriot, Ri Kang Boom. And we also have Abdi Abdo. So all the big men who we would expect to be in that group are there. And there's a very first glimpse of the other Bahrainian, the former Moroccan who changed allegiance in 2013. That's El Hassan El Abbasi, who has run 2:10.57 in Lisbon last year. He's just about keeping touch with that lead group.
Yeah, just about. I think that's very pertinent because you're getting a sense that maybe the elastic just stretching a little bit to him. He's looking a little bit concerned. But fairly soon, I think you'll start to see some distinct pods developing. Certainly back in that second group, those who have been dropped, the likes of Tiapkin, he knows his way around the block. And I think there'll be one or two men looking across and thinking, hang on, we've still got perhaps an hour and a half to go out here. The work's getting pretty hard. Terrific job today being done by our men and women there up in the helicopters, just looking through the humidity, the mists of a Saturday morning here in Jakarta. And they'll start to create, I think, these little pods, because if these guys are going to get home and get home in reasonable times, they're not going to do it all on their own.
That's Kim from Korea Republic, trying to bridge that gap. It's his first official international appearance for his country. What a proud moment for him, 28 years of age. And once again, we've got the veteran 36-year-old from Mongolia deciding to push the pace. Do you know what? I would love to see him get a medal. He was just off the podium, talking about the man wearing 629 with the sort of French Legionnaires cap on, keeps glancing over. He just missed a medal in the Asian Games 4 years ago. He's been a consistent performer for his country on the global stage. He's gone inside 2:10. He has a whole host of national records, half marathon, marathon. He's been a great ambassador for Mongolian distance running, and he's decided that he's not going to be intimidated by the reputation and the poise of the likes of Hiroto Inui, who now leads. It would be really good if the Mongolian could get in the mix for the podium come the business end.
We just got a glimpse there of the Selamat Datang monument. Now, Selamat Datang, Indonesian for welcome. And that was part of the construction plan when this city first hosted those Asian Games more than 5 decades ago. You're mentioning the Koreans here in the marathon. They won every marathon bar one in the Asian Games over a period of 2 decades. Lee Bong-ju winning in 98 and 2002. He's one of the big names of road running in Asia in the history over the course of the last 30 years. So the Koreans have got a good record. Indeed, that sequence between 1990 and 2010 was only broken by that win by the former Kenyan Mubarak Shami at home, in inverted commas, in Doha in 2006.
I still think it's amazing that we haven't had a Japanese winner in this race since 1986, and I'm sure the various Japanese journalists, among 7,000 broadcasters, journalists and photographers who've made the trip here to Jakarta, I'm sure that point has been put to him, and it will be a motivational factor. That's Duo of China, the tall figure who's been twice fifth in the Asian Championships over 5,000 metres. He now leads, and one by one they are beginning to drift off. Shin of Korea Republic has lost touch with that group. 5.74 just in the back of shot there, going under that billboard that goes across the main road. And we've mentioned El Abbasi, still just about attached to the lead group, but only just. So the two men from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, 267, 268. Both still in there with that distinctive bright blue. That's a grim-looking view from the point of view of Shin Kwang-sik. Not a bad athlete, 12th in Seoul this year, 214, but he's finding it tough going here. And I don't think he would have elected to suddenly lose touch with that lead group. He still looks okay, his cadence is fine, but he's allowed that gap to grow. There's Ri Kang-boom, who won the Pyongyang Marathon this year in 2:12. He also won it last year. His compatriot Pak Choi, 2:67, just on the right there. Very good performance at the World Champs back in Beijing in searing conditions, and he was 26 in the Rio Marathon. So the two men from the People's Republic of Korea going very well indeed.
You mentioned it's been a long time since we've had a Japanese champion, since Takayuki Nakayama set that course record, or should I say that games record, back in 1986 when he ran 2:08.21. Now that was a really world-class time, and Nakayama was a world-class athlete. There we are, we're coming up to the fountain, the Selamat Datang Monument. That is stunning, isn't it?
It is, and you can just see at the top of the monument a man and a woman in the waving position. That was built as a gesture of openness to all nations and all visitors for the 4th edition of the Asian Games back in 1962.
And as the name suggests, Selamat Datang, that's welcome in Indonesian.
And just to give you a glimpse, an idea of the scale, apparently those two figures are 5 meters tall.
There you go.
Welcome to Jakarta.
Yeah, getting on for 3 times life size, aren't they? Yeah, talking about Nakayama, well, another famous Japanese marathon runner picked up the silver that year, Hiromi Taniguchi. Nakayama, now he took that talent that he showed winning this title on. He came 4th in the Olympic Games marathon in Seoul in 1988, and that was a tough old experience. I think off the top of my head, I think it was Galindo Bourdin. Did he win it?
He did.
Back in 1988. And that, I remember, being a punishing experience. And he was a winner of Tokyo marathons and the famous Fukuoka marathon, where we saw some very fast times last year as well. So this event does have a heritage of perhaps being the launch pad of outstanding careers, not necessarily winning massive races when we get to the major commercial marathons, the big city marathons, where we have the pacemakers and we have the East Africans running 2:2s, 2:3s, and on a really bad day, a 2:4. But as you say, Rob, when we get to the championship competitions, when they're run in the heat of summer, in conditions which are not necessarily conducive to fast times, when there are no pacemakers, when suddenly, and I know events like the Beijing Olympics in 2008, when we saw some almost obscene times run in desperate conditions, but when maybe the race times are not quite as quick.
There are two different animals, aren't there? There are those who can follow a pacemaker and run 2:04 plus change, but can very rarely demonstrate that in a major championship. And then you've got guys who are just incredibly consistent at racing. Stefano Baldini, we talked about Bourdin winning in Seoul in 88, and you were talking about the Athens Marathon as well. That men's was absolutely incredible.
And that was Baldini, wasn't it?
Yes, Stefano Baldini, I'm pretty sure he never ran inside 2:07. Olympic champion, I think perhaps a couple of European titles, and 2 World Championship bronze medals. One of the best major championship racers in history.
He was a thinking racer.
He was a fantastic racer.
A great tactician,
and not
that's
one of
what
the
it was about.
fastest. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are men and women who are made to run championship marathons. They're entirely different affairs, and believe me, they are on days like this. 54 minutes on the clock. Some of these men are going to be out there for another hour and a half, and you don't want to be, in all honesty, looking like Shin is at the moment, and on your own. Clearly, I think he's got a bit of a stitch. I'd be very, very surprised if he gets home today.
Now we have another casualty from that lead group. It's Pak Choi, who was 5th in the Asian Games 4 years ago. He was a man I was mentioning who performed very well in Rio a couple of years ago. He has obviously run into some problems here. Very, very close to those concrete bollards on the right-hand side. You can see the air's clearing a little bit here as the sun begins to burn off some of the early morning haze, which means it's getting hotter and hotter. So Pak Choi has become detached from that lead group. He's just at the bottom of your picture there.
So he's about 30-40 metres, and that gap is going to grow and grow, and he's another athlete at this stage of the race. They're not even halfway.
So we're down
he's
to 8.
He's going to struggle, isn't he?
We are down to 8 now. And 4 in fact, half the field deciding to go under the cooling showers, 4 deciding they don't need it. I'm not sure about you, Martin. I would have thought in conditions such as these, even though this is where these guys are from, it's where they've done most of their training, I would have thought any opportunity you can take to cool down, you would do. But obviously half of them deciding they want to stay dry.
Shin of Korea on his own. And there is that leading group of 8. Alabasi, you mentioned him, wearing the colours of Bahrain, former North African, Moroccan. Has got himself back onto that group. Now, in all likelihood, that is because the sting has gone out of the pace at the front. It'll be interesting to see if we do get a reliable, authentic split time at halfway, because that will start to give us some idea of what these men are capable of. You would have thought if they're going off a modest pace, there will be somebody there, particularly Inui, maybe Sonoda, his Japanese teammate, who will be looking to run the so-called negative split. When we talk in those terms, what we're saying is a negative split is basically running the second half of the race faster than the first. And the 2 Japanese, you can see there, that's Sonoda on the right, as Rob so beautifully put it with his French Legionnaire's headwear, which is absolutely right, protecting the back of his neck from the direct heat. So there you go, the run through of that group.
8 men still in with a chance of the first athletics gold of the 2018 Asian Games. There'll be no medal harder earned than those in the 2 marathons, although perhaps the 50k walkers may argue against us. We'll be seeing them on Thursday morning, but almost all in a line. And I tell you what, Abdi Abdo looks pretty relaxed. He's now just obscured a little bit behind Sonada. Very comfortable in that lead group, the 21-year-old Bahrainian. Martin mentioned the fluttering flags a little earlier on, and you can see there is just the merest hint of a breeze, which I think would be quite welcome considering how stifling it's been here.
Very welcome.
Over the last couple of days.
Yes, there's a lot of looking around, isn't there? Because there are men here who are running well within themselves, others who frankly are not. And I think by and large, they all know quite who they are in that respect, because certainly the 2 Japanese, they should be okay here. Abdo's looking strong there, 1-2-1 right in the middle. Barely moves a muscle, does he? But there are others here who are having a good look around. The Chinese, 198, you can see there at the front with the peak cap on, looking pretty relaxed at the moment, is Duo Bougie. Well, a more typical scene on the road in Jakarta can be seen there on the overpass, because one thing that Jakarta tends to have are fairly busy roads. Looking down on this marathon route, it is close to unique. I know it's Saturday morning, but even on Saturday mornings it tends to be quite busy in this part of the world. But this section of the route closed down, the out and back loop, 20 kilometres, a little bit tagged on at either end to ensure we get the full tilt 42.2. Great tradition, the marathon. Goes right back, of course, to the name itself and the history of Olympism. With the 385 yards, supposedly because it was tagged on at the end of White City back in 1908, so the runners could go past the Queen. So I suppose in its own little way, imperialism lives on in the history of the marathon. 42.2k, that's how we refer to it these days, rather than 26 miles, 385 yards.
It's a great event which tests body and mind. The old adage, I think, is very true, and I've run a few marathons, certainly not at the pace we're watching at the moment in these conditions. In terms of how your body feels, halfway is 20 miles. That is how much the last 6 miles, or 10k if you want to refer to it in metric, that is how much the end of the race can take out of you. Spectacular changes in leaderboards can and often do occur at the business end of major championship marathons. And as an example of that, Pak Choi now becoming further detached, still going. The man from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, running his 20th marathon, but he's decided the pace from the leading 8 is too much for him. Still looks okay, but that's a big gap for him to bridge. And look at the loping ease with which Abdo is making progress down the course. We've got some distinctive styles here. Inui skipping along on his toes, and Abdo of Bahrain wearing 121 on the right of picture, loping along without a care in the world at the moment.
Yeah, you get a sense there. You saw 1 or 2 helicopters lurking. It's a real a stunning job from the broadcasting team here. We've got cameras on the road on motorbikes. We've got helicopters hovering. It's a real logistical challenge if you think about the organisers putting on an event like this. Jakarta putting its best foot forward for these games, closing the roads here so that we can do this in the morning in a city where much of the infrastructure is stretched, certainly on the roads, by the amount of traffic there is on here. And we've got our team up there in the air with the helicopters and down there on the ground with the bikes. And in the heart of it, of course, we've got men running 42.2 kilometres, a tough old trip. There we go. The Asian Games heading in one direction and Saturday morning in Jakarta in the other.
I was doing my research on Jakarta just as a city and its history, and the best description I found was in one of the guidebooks broadcasters receive when we arrive in a country for a major event. The unofficial nickname for Jakarta is the Big Durian. It says, because the durian is the king of fruits. It might not smell very good, but it tastes brilliant. The principle of it is people are aware that Jakarta has its complexities and its issues, but there's an immense pride here in what the city is and what the city represents in the 4th most populated country in the world. So that's the unofficial nickname of Jakarta, the Big Durian. I quite like that.
It doesn't smell nice, but it tastes all right.
Something like that.
So wearing 121, there is Abdi Abdo. Just floating on the outside. You get a sense, not only with him, but also Hayato Sonoda wearing 477. Those two men very, very comfortable at the moment. Hiroto Inui, the Japanese, you can just see partially obscured behind the shoulder of the Chinese duo Buji wearing 198. There are certainly 3 or 4 men at the moment who are running well within their capacity, and they still have a fair amount of fuel to burn. 1 or 2 others, well, that may not be the case.
We started the race, 21 men from 13 nations back in the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium. We're now down to a lead pack of 8. as we edge towards the halfway stage of this men's marathon here in Jakarta.
And that, Rob, has been the pattern now, hasn't it? For certainly 10 or 15 minutes. These 8 men all running together. There is just a sense that there is some cooperation between them to get through the next, 5, 10 kilometres. And then at some point, well, the gloves will come off. The racing will really start. There will be 1 or 2 here, I've got no doubt, who simply are hurting now or drop off the pace in this period without anybody applying any particular injection of pace or tempo. But I think there's a degree of cooperation certainly among some there, and this is a dreadful way to have to run a race. Before you realise what's happened, Kim there of Korea on his own, the leading group just slowly edging their way ahead of him, although he's been on his own a long while now, although he's trying desperately hard to try and claw his way back. Just possible that leading group, having lost a bit of tempo, have allowed him to do that.
I think he is coming back to that group, and he's gone past Pak Choi from the People's Republic of Korea. So Pak Choi going backwards. What a run that is, if he can manage to reattach himself to that group. And we saw a few people just outside the stadium an hour or so ago. This is superb support for the marathon, especially bearing in mind we're still only just a shade beyond 7 a.m. on a Saturday, when people could be forgiven for having a little bit of a lie-in after a hard week at work. But news is spreading that the Asian Games Marathon is producing some good drama here, and we'll watch to see whether the Korean can indeed bridge that gap. He's having a go. You can just see him in the background because you've got the second television motorbike following him just to track his progress.
I guess the issue is, Rob, and you're vastly experienced in doing these races, how many times have you seen this? Athletes clawing their way back onto the leading group. There's a reason they've got to do that. It's because at some point they've struggled with the tempo. We're not halfway yet. If they get back, how long do many of them tend to last? I think for him, he needs to get somebody to run with, and of course the most sensible thing is to try and bridge the gap in front of you rather than wait for those chasing you to catch up. But just a little hiatus as the drink stables, when it's 8 men though. And there's the cooperation. You can see bottles being passed around. That's the old Marathon Runners Union. Well, it may seem a little odd and a little contradictory because these men will be going toe-to-toe, gloves off, in about half an hour, 45 minutes time, but they're both perfectly happy, many of them, to be sharing drinks bottles and sponges and the like.
Oh, there's such a mutual understanding. It's a bit like that old unwritten rule that you give a wave when you see a fellow runner out, especially when conditions are brutal. If you're out for an early morning run and it's lashing with rain, you always give a little wave to the shadowy figure running in the opposite direction on the other pavement. There's a great mutual respect among athletes, and in particular among distance runners. Everybody knows there is no shortcut to a PB or a major championship medal. You really do have to earn it the hard way. Right, we're edging towards the halfway stage of this men's marathon. And now the race proper will start to begin to unfold. We just saw Kim going round that corner. That's the gap he's got to bridge. The man in ninth at the top of your picture. The gap was around about 12 or 13 seconds. There he is. That's the view. And up ahead, the familiar sight of Serod Batachir deciding to go his own way, moving across to the left-hand side of the road. This Mongolian loves to shake things up a little bit. When he goes to the front, it's almost as if he's sprinting. He's wasted so much energy there, moving across to the left-hand side, now to the right-hand side as we look at it.
He's a hard man, isn't he? How many marathons was it, you said?
This is his 56th.
56th marathon.
It's an incredible record, isn't it? And remember, if he's in the shake-up towards the end, 4 times he's run the Olympic marathon. He's never won any major medal and got so close in Incheon 4 years ago, finishing in that dreadful position of 4th. That's the cameras focusing in on Kim. Got a good PB, 2:13 plus bits, 11th in Seoul in March. He's a 64.5-minute half marathon runner. And the grimacing former Moroccan, El Abbasi, still on that group, but still at the back. He's working very, very hard, you suspect, to stay with that group, Martin.
Yes, you get a sense that if there was an injection of pace at the front, El Abbasi would be the first to slip out of the back door. It's almost happened a couple of times already. So we're back in the area of the GBK complex. There you go, halfway. Well, it's just outside 70 minutes at the moment. That, if that is an authentic halfway split, good reason to believe it is, 1:10.32. So we're talking, as things stand, a 2:20 marathon. Now, I know it's a slightly impolite comparison, but you wouldn't win every women's major city marathon in 2:20. I think it's fair to say that there are a number of men here who are targeting that so-called negative split. Now, there will be 1 or 2 who achieve it, but quite how much you can turn this into a negative split, well, even if they run 5 minutes faster, it's still only a 2:15 marathon.
Yeah, the time is going to be irrelevant here, isn't it? And we were talking about Kim closing the gap. He had closed the gap, but we can tell with our own eyes by looking that he's now a little bit further adrift from this leading group of 8, many of whom, as you've indicated, Martin, with a halfway split of just over 70 minutes, many of whom will be very, very comfortable with this pace. I think if the 2 Japanese athletes and the likes of Abdo are feeling fairly comfortable, there's almost no doubt that we're going to get a negative split. It's not going to be a quick race. They're not going to challenge Nakayama's Asian Games record of 2:08.21 from 1986, but we're going to see a great half marathon now of pure racing, because many of the guys in this group will be feeling fresh, and that means we could see some very intriguing little twists of drama over this second half of the race. That's the first half done. The box is ticked. They'll be feeling pretty fresh, especially the 2 Japanese who have run, 2:06.54 and 2:09.34. Batachir in that group has gone inside 2:10, albeit not for a while. He's run 2:15 this season, the veteran Mongolian, as the Korean still desperately tries to close the gap. A lot of those leading 8 will be feeling very comfortable.
Yes, I mean, again, it's slightly unfair when we consider the conditions, which clearly are a major factor here. But Inui, when he ran that time of 2:06.54 in Tokyo in the last 12 months, at halfway, he would have been something like 2 kilometres faster than he is here. Now, that is a huge distance, even over 21.1. And that is perhaps exactly why he's up on his toes, why he's looking as if he's on a morning training run, because he probably has done some fairly hard, sustained runs in his preparation for this in the last few weeks at this sort of pace, and gone back home and felt that he could just go out there and do it all again. So he should be feeling right within himself. And look there, he's just looking across. And his challenge from a mental side is to continually resist the temptation to go. Every time he feels that temptation, to maybe go back to or to move on to something like what he regards as his true racing pace. He's just got to say, don't do it. Don't do it. And hope that there's that little voice in the back of his head telling him, leave it, leave it, leave it. Follow a plan, decide when you're going to go, but don't be lured or tempted really by your own feelings of comfort to do it too soon.
Yeah, there's still a long way to go. I wonder he will have gone through in his mind. He is the favourite because he has run inside 2:07 this year. He's the second fastest Asian in the world this year. I wonder if he'd gone through a 2:20 type pace scenario to halfway. I wonder how late he would leave it, because inevitably, just as they speed up a little bit, I'm sure the pace will increase gradually as they sense that they're heading towards the business end of things. One or two will drop off the pace here. Maybe it's a case of him looking round and monitoring who else is in that group, including his compatriot Sonoda, who's wearing 4:77. I wonder how late, if he is feeling really good, Inui, and he should be at 2:20, bearing in mind he has run inside 2:07 this year. I wonder how late he's prepared to leave it. Maybe the answer to that question is entirely dictated by who's around him at 30k, for instance.
That's right. I mean, it's all about striking a balance, isn't it? Because I think we can work on the basis he's not the only one in that leading group, which is now in danger of reducing from 8 to 7. You can see El Abbasi. It's 3 or 4 metres as they get the sponges, but El Abbasi, I don't think he's going to be there for too much longer. But at the same time as being wary not to go too soon, there is a danger in going too late. You can allow men who may not be as comfortable, have quite the same quality as you do, give them a free ticket into what is essentially a run-off for the title. And if you leave that too late, then you can come unstuck. So it's all about striking a balance, and you'd like to think that an athlete of his quality, a man who's run 2:06, has come out here with a race plan. You hope he's done his homework on his other rivals. It does amaze me in sport sometimes, despite all the sophistication sportsmen, women teams have, and how much we hear often about the extent of preparation, sometimes the most obvious things are passed by. If you're going to run a major city marathon here, you've got to take, a championship marathon here, you've got to take a look at your opposition. You can put a black line through most of them because you know they're simply not in the same class as you. You look at their strengths and weaknesses. You try and see the race through their eyes, and you think, well, how are they going to run it? How are they going to try and beat me? And you'd like to think, as much as athletes will tell you, look, I'm going to go out there and run my own race. Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes, that's a bit of a platitude, because you do have to, I think, take cognizance of what your big rivals are going to do as well, and you have to adopt some sort of race plan which is going to counter that. But we've now got, it's back to 8 again, but for how much longer? It'll become 7 in a moment. We're moving into the second half of the race. I would have thought, Rob, in the next 10, 12, maybe 15 minutes, this leading group really is going to get shaken up.
Yeah, once we get to the stage where they've been running for an hour and a half, they are all going to start to think about their strategy as they edge towards the last 6 miles, 10k. Both Japanese men right up in that group. You would have to say by body language, Sonoda doesn't look quite as comfortable. There he is in the shot, just running alongside the very tall Duo Buji of China. Sonoda doesn't look quite as comfortable as Inui. But let's not forget Abdi Abdo, loping along in that group. Just missed a medal in the Youth Olympics over 3,000 metres. The veteran from Mongolia, Surod Bhattacharya, who was just off the podium 4 years ago. And the man from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We've lost Pak Choi, but Ri Kang Bom is still in that group. He's won the last 2 editions of the Pyongyang Marathon. He's gone inside 2:13. The fact that the pace in the first half of the race was so modest, obviously we're making allowances for how humid it is, makes this second half of the race fascinating, because almost all the men in this group, possibly notwithstanding El Abbasi, who's been grimacing for about the last 15k, the big loping Bahrainian at the back has just looked at his watch. Other than him, the rest look okay here, and they will all start to see this as an opportunity. We can't hang the gold medal around Inui's neck. Yes, he's running on his toes and he's the quickest man this year in that group of 8. But there'll be others who fancy this as a massive opportunity to get themselves an Asian Games medal. The very first medal event on the athletics programme here on the streets of Jakarta, which have been cleared for this race. And there'll be some atmosphere as they head back towards the finish, the glory and the relief of the finish line in the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium. All that early morning haze has burnt off. Good sunshine, great work by the cameramen and women in the helicopters, really enjoying this coverage. The most ultimate physical game of chess you could possibly play. And now, once again, the grimacing Ella Bassi has allowed a few metres to grow, so very soon 8 is going to become 7, and I think it is in the process of happening right now. Still no move yet from either man from Japan, and the veteran 36-year-old from Mongolia still setting the pace. 7.93. Tony Payne having a good run, the former New Zealander, now representing Thailand. His PB just a shade inside 220. So he's on course for a PB if he can keep this going. And he must have made some good progress up through the field, because he is the leading chaser, where for so long we were watching whether Kim of Korea could close that gap. And in not too distant future, he'll have Ella Bassi to try and reel in. The lead group is now down to 7 with 1 hour and 21.5 minutes on the clock. Bhattacharya looks over his shoulder. The main contenders are still there. And look at that. We just saw Bhattacharya, Martin, waving his right hand as if to say, come on, I'm not the only one here who can run at the front and set the pace. I think the Mongolian's getting frustrated with some of the others in this lead group. He perhaps feels he shouldn't be the only one pushing the pace on.
Somebody we haven't mentioned an awful lot, but who's looking very relaxed in the blue vest from the People's Republic of Korea. White peak cap right at the back, Ri Kang Bom. Has run 2:12.53 this year, which in global terms isn't particularly great shakes, but at this schedule, as you do just get a sense that that early morning mist, the real dense humidity just burning off a little bit, but believe me, it'll be getting warm out there. It'll be pushing up 30 degrees now, very, very close to it, through 25 kilometres now in the sort of 82, 83 minutes. And when we look at this race and we break it down into sectors, we've almost now got to switch into the way we do this for major city women's marathons, because this is going to be closer to a 2:15, 2:16 than certainly the sort of 2:02s, 2:03s, 2:04s we have become associated with at major city marathons. This is very different. These men, the winner here, is going to be out there still for more than 50 minutes. There's still a long, long way to go.
That's why these races are so absorbing to watch as they gradually unfold. Always one or two drifting off the back. Tony Payne for Thailand, 29-year-old, trying to bridge the gap up to the leaders. Ella Bassi of Bahrain has once again reattached himself, and they've noticeably slowed here, because look at the speed with which Payne of Thailand has closed down that last 30 or 40 metres. So at one stage, we were looking as though we were going to be down to 7. Not only has Ella Bassi managed to reattach himself, so too has Tony Payne, who has gone, by the way, straight to the front.
Well, this is a remarkable run when you consider he's the man who eased down on the accelerator as they left the main stadium. He's got a best time of 2:19, which doesn't even put him really in the same postcode at the end, the same zip code as a number of men in this field. But it is also, it serves to illustrate just how modest at the moment the pace is here. So you'd have to think there are men here who still feel as if they're out there for a morning jog. Inui, I would have thought, top of the list. His teammate, Tsunoda as well. Maybe even the Chinese runner, their duo.
And the significant factor of that replay was because Surod Bhattacharya, who's always given himself 5 or 10 metres on the rest at those drink stations, missed his own nutrition there. And the experienced man who's done over 50 marathons missed out on all drinks available at that station. So he will need to make absolutely certain that the next time there's a water station that he doesn't miss out, because even though he has run 50 plus marathons, in these conditions they cannot afford to go without their water or their own specific concoction of energy gels and nutrition. But Bhattacharya, the Mongolian, missed out at that previous drink station.
Yes, I do feel a little for Tony Payne because he's made an awful lot of ground. He still, though, has to be out there for at least 50 minutes, perhaps more.
It's a great story that he's managed to rejoin this group. And I wonder if his reattachment to the leaders begins to make the favourites like Inui, Tsunoda and Abdo feel as though maybe it's time to push on. Because what they don't want is somebody having an inspired race and perhaps giving them some problems towards the business end. You do sometimes find extraordinary one-off performances in major championships, men and women becoming inspired by what they've seen up ahead of them on the course, and Payne will be loving the fact that he's managed to reattach himself. But having said that, he is now once again off the back, so perhaps that glorious reattachment was a temporary one.
Yes, you get some idea of the gaps that have opened. 48 seconds back to the chasing group. There he is wearing his Thailand vest, Tony Payne. So 8 became 7, became 8, became 9. And I think we're in danger of seeing Tony Payne slipping off the back again.
This is interesting, Martin. Tsunoda has decided to go to the front, and he's got Bhattacharya just behind him. Abdo still loping along. Inui looking very good, just cooling his left arm and now his right arm with a bit of a sponge. Bhattacharya looking over his shoulder. Payne may rue that little burst to rejoin the leaders. Perhaps a little flutter of adrenaline with over an hour and a half in his legs. That could prove a little bit costly for the Thailand athlete. And it's Tsunoda now who has decided to take things on. Maybe felt as though the time had come to just gradually begin winding up the pace a little bit. Payne's gait looks a touch laboured.
No, it certainly does, doesn't it? I'm just getting the first hint here that Tsunoda is starting to race. He is a quality marathon runner. Finished second behind the South African Desmond Mokubu at home in the Beppu Oida Marathon. That was back in February, in conditions a good deal cooler than this. And that was in a time well inside 2:0:10. It was more the sort of 2:8s and 2:9s that they were running there. So he's somebody who inevitably will be feeling a bit uncomfortable in these conditions. But he's now starting to race. This is happening. That is why Also, the former Moroccan you can see at the back of the group there in 8th place. Expect him to drop back quite swiftly. But it's the Japanese, the second of those, Hayato Tsunoda, just starting to race a little, just easing down on the accelerator. Just getting a sense of what damage he can try and do to one or two of those behind. And I think Inouye, who is following his teammate, will be fairly comfortable with that.
I think I agree. I was just thinking that as you were talking. I think Inouye will almost be a little bit relieved that someone's just beginning to push the pace back up to that which he'll be used to racing, Hiroto Inouye, because there won't be many races in recent, certainly big city marathons, where he's gone through halfway outside 70 minutes, the favourite. But the big names are just beginning to gather themselves now for this final assault on the big title. It's still looking good for both Japanese men, but it's also turning out to be a fine race for Batachir at the moment, the Mongolian. And Abdi Abdo, the 21-year-old from Bahrain, loping along in that group. Let's not forget about, we've mentioned him a couple of times, Ri Kang Boom, winner of the Pyongyang Marathon a couple of times this year and last year. The two Chinese athletes, Dong Gujian, national champion this year, 2:14, so he should be fairly comfortable at this pace. And Duo Buji, second behind his compatriot in those national championships. Both the Chinese men raced in Rio. Dong was 29th, which is no bad performance.
Well, there you get the names there of the leading 9 or so runners. And El Abbasi, the Bahrainian, the former Moroccan, where he's been for pretty much the last 45 minutes or so, at the back of the group, just slipping back 2 or 3 metres, benefiting when the sting comes out of the pace at the front, manages to get himself back on again. But now you've got Tsunoda just sliding down the throttle and just saying, right, we're going to turn up the heat. And now, but at least he's got some company now as Kim, the Korean. That's pretty timely.
Yes, he looks as though he's got a stitch as well, which is unfortunate for him. That was Sanchay Namket of Thailand, SEA Games silver medalist over 5,000 metres and 10,000 metres, but they're a long way back down the course. And remember, they've got Tony Payne ahead of them for Thailand in no man's land after his brief flutter to rejoin the lead group. We're almost back down to 7. I think it's significant that Tsunoda is now the one setting the pace. There are a couple of little palms in the backs going in that group. I think they were running so close together they were in danger of clipping each other's heels. And I did notice that the Mongolian Batachir at this station has managed to get his nutrition, having missed out on the last one. But look at the cadence, though, Martin, of... that's really nice. Batachir sharing a drink there with the favourite Inouye. And I was just going to mention, Inouye's gait hasn't changed at all. He still looks unbelievably comfortable. Yes, he'll be feeling it. He's been running for an hour and a half, in pretty tough conditions. But he still looks so smooth.
But he's up on his toes like a half-miler, isn't he? 4.65, they're on the left. Tsunoda of Japan out in front. Inouye looking very relaxed. When you run like that, I suppose one of the issues is that you always tend to look pretty comfortable until the wheels really do come off. But he must be running well within himself. It's like he's out there just doing an easy midwinter session, like a half-miler, having to stop himself.
Contrast his style to Tsunoda. Tsunoda's going well, but the head's leaning over a little bit. He's rolling. Inouye is so smooth. El Abbasi.
And Batachir, the man who's a veteran of 450 marathons or whatever it is, who simply just loves it. Clearly, he just thrives on the heavy workload that is necessary for somebody to be a top quality marathon runner year after year after year. He must have a hard body as well, because marathon bodies do take a lot of stick, running on the roads day after day after day. It's not just the competition, it's preparing for them. And when you've run as many marathons as he has, I mean, it's not quite 450, but it's quite a few, and done it at this sort of quality. But look at him there, in second place, 6:29, Bhattacharya. Would be great if we get a medal, really would be.
Sonoda pushing the pace. 5:83. Kistabikov, Kyrgyzstan. Asian Championship bronze over 10,000 metres last year. Just checking his watch. He, along with his compatriot Tiapkin, were forcing the early pace. Not so now. Still looks fairly strong. And once again, the familiar sight of El Abbasi off the back of that group, but just about managing to maintain contact.
So that leading group, 2 Chinese, 2 Japanese, we've got the Mongolian, we've got the Korean, Ri Kangbom, and we have the Bahrainian, Abdi Abdo, who, if your sentiments are with the athlete there wearing 121 on the right hand side of the group as we look, well, absolutely no reason in the way he's been running this race to suggest he can't go on and win a medal, perhaps even the title.
Well, it's only his 3rd marathon. He ran his first last year in 2:12 on the nose, was second in Rome this year in 2:08:32. So it's clearly a distance at which he still has a great deal to learn, but it's also a distance he's getting more and more comfortable with. Only his 3rd outing over the 26.2.
We've said it before, but El Abbasi really is losing contact now. It's about 10 metres back there to the Bahrainian, the former Moroccan. And if Sonoda keeps on working hard at the front there, then it won't be long before the Moroccan really does slip off and find himself running on his own.
Still yet to see the race proper between the favourites. They're keeping their powder dry, as they say. They're keeping their big drive for the finish under wraps. El Abbasi just trying to shake some life into his arms. When you get towards the peak of your abilities in a marathon, you can sometimes get pins and needles in your hands, because when you start struggling, the body directs all the energy and all the blood towards the vital organs. So you can get a bit tingly in the hands. That's happened to me once during a marathon. Sonoda still leads. A fascinating climax in prospect to this marathon, there really is. The big men are all still there. They have run conservatively, they've run sensibly in this weather, on this course, and we may see some metaphorical fireworks fly in the closing stages. Abdo, the Bahrainian on the left with that long loping stride, keeps looking over his shoulder. Bhattacharya is the slightly uncomfortable looking Mongolian with the French Legionnaire's cap. He's now alongside Sonoda, a man who seems uncomfortable when he's not forcing the pace. He's aiming at surely what would be his last Asian Games. He's aiming for his first major medal, the 4-time Olympic marathon runner, having finished 4th in Incheon. And there's a little bit of a dispute going on there. That's Abdi Abdo has just been remonstrating with Bhattacharya. I think he's a little bit unhappy with the slightly ragged way in which the Mongolian has been moving to the front and then drifting back. There's a little bit of needle in that group.
But look at his arm carriage as well. The arms do wave out a bit. He's got quite sharp elbows. So let's put some names, shall we, on numbers. There at the back you can see the former Moroccan, that's El Abbasi. But in front, 7 athletes. The blue vest, 268, the Korean, Ri Kangbom. The 2 Chinese, 197, 198. 197 is Dong. 198 is Duo. We have the Bahrainian, Abdi Abdo. 1-2-1. That's he there on the left-hand side of that leading group. The two Japanese, Sonoda, who's taken himself to the front, 477. Inui, the fastest man in the field, up on his toes there, wearing 465. Serod Badachir of Mongolia, 629. That's him in second place at the moment. Well, I think if Abdo's got a few problems with Badachir, the best thing to do is just stay away from him. It's not a time in the race when you've been out there for 1 hour and 40, as they have now. Somewhere in the region of, I would have thought, 35 minutes or so to go. This is 30 kilometres. It's going to turn into a 10-kilometre race. We've got about 35 minutes out there, I would have thought. But they are starting to race now with Sonoda. And this will give a little bit of inspiration and a bit of a kick. The drinks table there, a little bit of palms being squeezed into the backs or the middle of the backs of athletes there as they pick up drinks and do just get in one another's way a little, but that was fairly smooth. Sonoda tosses the drinks bottle away. They're in second place, Abdo, and now it's breaking up. Now we're getting the move. Sonoda has kicked on. Look how relaxed Abdo looks there in second place.
And I know a couple of metres allowances have to be made for the few metres that one or two do lose when they go through the drink stations, but Rikam Bom has immediately become detached from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He's now off the back, and so too for the first time is Batachir, who now finds himself drifting. There's the Korean Rikang Bom, and all of a sudden Batachir of Mongolia finds himself in 7th place. Ella Bassi is in 6th. They've gone through 30k, and now we get down to the really, really important stage of this race, and it looks very much as though that group of 8 have been shattered, and there are now still just about 6 in touch, with Sonoda definitely appearing to adhere to a pre-race tactic of putting the hammer down at 30k. Interesting as well, Martin, that Inui put a cap on.
No, I was going to make exactly the point.
Station.
As Sonoda puts the hammer down, Inui puts the cap on. And it seems quite arbitrary in some respects, but there's absolutely no doubt here that the sight of that 30-kilometre barrier has turned this into, banner I should say, has turned this into a 12.2-kilometre race. Because now the racing has really started. That leading group has splintered. The quality has come to the front. And it is, Sonoda is doing it, but you get a sense looking at his face, he's looking a little bit uncomfortable. There have been one or two grimaces. He's perhaps really here serving a purpose for men behind him. Well, there he is. We've certainly learnt a bit about him today. Tony Payne wearing the vest of Thailand. Had his spell at the front coming out of the main stadium, then he caught the leading group. Looking rather laboured, but he's going to be very close to that lifetime best. I would have thought of 2:19 if he keeps going.
Certainly got a chance of a PB, and you can't ask any more of an athlete in a major championship than a personal best.
But look how comfortable Inui is on the right. He's still looking like an 800-metre man. I mean, the last time I saw an athlete looking that comfortable, his name was Steve Ovett, and he was running at Crystal Palace in a 1,500-metre race. This fella is running a marathon.
And also, how interesting, Martin, that we had Ella Bashi, always the man who looked as though he would be the first of the leading 8 to go. We've lost Rikang Bum. We have at least temporarily, well, maybe his race is over for the medals. We've lost Batachir of Mongolia. Ella Bassi still looks uncomfortable, and yet he's still in touch with the leaders. 8 have now become 6.
He's a hard fella, isn't he? The Moroccan. He must feel like toothache to the rest. He's nagging, and he simply won't go away.
Sonoda noticeably stepped up the pace, having gone through 30k. This is Ri Kang Bom, 25-year-old, twice a winner of the Pyongyang Marathon, right up there with the leading 8. But having gone through 30k, he was the first and clearest casualty of Sonoda's little step up in pace. He's looking up the course to Serod Batachir to see whether he can somehow regain some momentum, but with an hour and 3/4 on the board, his quest for a medal, you suspect, is over. This is the leading group of 6.
So Sonoda, who's done all the work over the course of the last 5 kilometres. He's the man who's broken the field. Look at the Bahrainian, the former Moroccan, El Abbasi. He simply will not go away, will he? The Chinese wearing 197, that's Dong Guojian. He on the back of this leading group. Well, it does go to suggest that Sonoda's little burst, he's back on the accelerator pedal a little. All 6 men at the moment looking fairly relaxed. Well, Batachir's been broken.
I think from a neutral's point of view, we were both hoping that maybe the 4th place veteran who's in his 56th marathon might have a chance of a medal, but
would have been a cracking story, wouldn't it?
It would, but that looks as though that's slipping away. The medals, barring some very strange set of circumstances, will be going to China, Bahrain and Japan. We have 2 men from each nation in this group of 6. Abdo and El Abbasi for Bahrain, Dong and Duo for China, and of course Inouye, the pre-race favourite, 4.65, and Sonoda, his teammate, who I think has done him a bit of a favour by just increasing the tempo a fraction. It's Dong, the national champion for China, at the back of that group now, and we've been talking in glowing terms about Inouye and how comfortable he looks. Abdo, far less experienced marathon runner, the younger man, 21 years of age, he looks good also in 2nd place. Still yet to run a bad marathon, and it's a good trajectory for the Bahrainian. 2:12 in his first, 2:08.32 in Rome, clipping heels there with 1:98, which is Duo, who was 2nd in those Chinese championships, and he's all of a sudden got a problem. Now that is significant. I thought he'd had his heels clipped. I'm not sure whether we'll get a glimpse now. Did his shoe come off, or has he got a more sinister problem here? I thought he was looking really good, but that happened very quickly, Martin, didn't it? Very quickly. All of a sudden, having looked really good, tagging along the pace set by Sonoda, the Bahrainian has encountered a problem. Now, is it a temporary one, or is he somehow going to reattach himself? I'm not quite sure what happened there. It did look like it was a clip of heels.
Well, if it was a clip of heels, then there was... Oh, no. He's slowing down again, isn't he? I think there's a muscle problem. There must be a muscle problem there. Probably lower leg. But you saw him there. He just checked his stride. 3 or 4 strides. He's going again now. But you get a sense here that there must be a muscle problem. Let's just see. Let's look at the face. Yeah, he's moved off to the side of the road, hasn't he?
He just got in. He just got in the way of Duo. He's clearly got a problem. He didn't have his heels clipped. He just suddenly slowed down.
There's a cramping, isn't there? Now, what is it? Is it lower leg? Could well be. Calf muscles. Maybe he's getting a cramp there somewhere. 2 or 3 times now he's had to pause. I think we can work on the basis that unless there is a dramatic rejuvenation here, there's probably relatively little wrong with the heart and lungs. It's purely and simply a muscle cramp. Could be a hamstring, perhaps more likely a calf, top of the Achilles, something like that.
That'll be very disappointing news for Abdi Abdo, because he had looked, up until about a minute and a half ago, very, very good indeed. and we were expecting a Bahrainian to be in the mix. He is now moving up and past Dong. We will keep a very close eye on whether he recovers. We were expecting a Bahrainian to be in the shake-up for a medal, but we weren't necessarily expecting it to be El Abbasi, the relatively inexperienced Moroccan who now represents Bahrain. But look at this.
Look at Abdo.
He's managing to get going again. If he has had a cramp, Martin, he has somehow managed to respond. And I wonder whether the two Japanese have noticed. And look at that. His compatriot El Abbasi saying, come on rejoin this. We think we've got a chance. Well, you don't often see an athlete who becomes detached this late in a marathon managing to get back. But somehow he is rejoining the leading four, which becomes a leading five.
And let's face it, Rob, it could only happen in a race which, frankly, by global marathon terms in 2018 is slow. You can't afford to almost break down to a jog twice and get back in the race in the major city marathon when it's being run at 2:03. You simply will never be able to run fast enough to do that. But with a bit of encouragement for his teammate, I mean, these two Bahrainians, we've had the former Moroccan there, who looked to be in pain, whose time within that leading group seemed to be coming to an end. He's dropped off the back once, it happened twice, it happened 3 times, and there he is. And you wouldn't put it past him here, picking up a medal. I mean, looking at this leading group now, there's only one man who appears to have run the race he wants to, and that is Hiroto Inui. 4:65. The only muscles he's moved of any significance over the course of the last hour and 50 minutes was perhaps to reach to the side of the road, pick up a peak cap and pop it on the top of his head, because he really is looking all over the winner at this moment. But the issue is in the marathon, it is a bit of a hackneyed line, but anything can happen when you get to the end. We saw that there with Abdi Abdo. Where did that come from? It may just have hit him entirely by surprise, but he's now back in the race. We just got to hope he doesn't get another cramp, doesn't get another leg problem. If he does, that surely will be the end of him.
2 Japanese men, 2 Bahrainians, 1 Chinese athlete. There's the second of them. That's Dong Zhuogan, the national champion. He's drifted off the back. He's now in 6th. It's a good effort in really tough conditions, but he will not be on the podium. The question, as far as the lead group is concerned, how late do you leave it? Because Abdo now, once again, looks okay. Sonoda seems as though he's running the kind of race where he doesn't want it to come down to a significant increase of tempo in the last 1 or 2K. But Inui looks very happy to track his compatriot and tick down the kilometres as we edge towards the finish of the race. He's definitely looking the most comfortable, but how late is he prepared to leave it? He knows this is a wonderful chance for a major title. Martin has been talking about his spell in the commentary box at the swimming pool, talking about Olympic champions looking as though they're on the verge of tears by becoming an Asian champion. This Asian Games means a huge amount to these men. How late is Inui prepared to leave it, do you think?
Well, Inui's also got to tell himself, if he was running one of those 2:06 marathons, he now would be getting within 13 minutes of the finish. That's not the case here. He's probably got, another 20 minutes to run. So again, he has to do the sums. Thankfully for him, his teammate Sonoda, he's doing the work. But Inui moving onto his shoulder, and rather in the fashion of a track racer here, putting himself somewhere where he can cover absolutely every move that comes. The unknown quantity, perhaps even to himself now, is Abdi Abdo. He will be hoping and praying that those problems he had, which were almost certainly a cramp of some sort in his lower leg, do not return. If they do, that'll finish him off. Who knows? It would be a stunning story if he can go on and win this race. Sonoda's kicking again, I think.
Little grimace on the face of Hayato Sonoda. Second in Oita. This is his 11th marathon. a 63-minute half marathon runner, as well as that sub 2:10 earlier this year. He's a class campaigner, and he's worth his spot in the leading five here. You suspect from the tactics he's employing that he will be hoping, yes, of course, there'll be some kind of support for his teammate, but at this stage of a marathon, it's every man for himself. I think Sonoda's hoping that by continuing to force the pace, one or two might begin to drop off, and that would give him a chance of a medal, because he will know Inui's strengths very well indeed, and he will, you suspect, realise that at this stage, unless something happens to Inui, he might not have the beating of his compatriot, but he wants a medal. He wants to get on the podium. But if that's the case, the Japanese man who's been forcing the pace and went to the front at 30-odd K, he needs two more men to drop off this group. And at the moment, all five are still there, including the man we've got used to seeing at the back of the group, grimacing, El Hassan El Abbasi, is still there, the Bahrainian. Two Japanese, two Bahrainians, and still that loping stride of Duo Buji of China, just inside the world's top 100 at the Olympics a couple of years ago. But when will the big move come from Inui, who has kept thus far his powder dry?
Yes, to use a metaphor from the racing game, I mean, he's one of these runners who's still on the bridle. He's a bit like the great Lester Piggott in the old days in the Derby. He's got his hands full. He's come round Tattenham Corner. It's all about when is he going to deliver his challenge. But now, and who would have thought this would be possible 10 kilometres ago, 15 kilometres ago? El Abbasi, who appeared to be struggling for so long in this race, he has gone to the front. So this is the first move from him. Are we having a slight shift? Well, having done that, he's immediately taken his foot off the accelerator. Sonoda again saying, look, I belong at the front. The peak cap has now come off for Inui. I wonder if that's an indication.
He's certainly taking on board a lot of water, much of which he's poured over his head. This is the chaser, Dong Gujian, China's national champion. Just struggling a little bit. Batachir has drifted back. We can see Ri Kang Bom behind the Chinese runner. But it's about the lead five. We're still no closer to working out who's feeling freshest here. 7 kilometres to go. And maybe, Martin, maybe for the first time, Inui taking a lot of liquid on board here. Maybe he is feeling it just a fraction. Still looks good. His leg cadence looks as good as it has done since the start of the race. But he wouldn't be human if he wasn't feeling some kind of discomfort, having run for nearly 2 hours already.
Yes, just passing through that magnificent welcome fountain. And it certainly will be a welcome sight to these men as they make their way now into the last few kilometres of the race. They're going to be going for maybe just inside 20 minutes more. It's going to be certainly one of the slowest Asian Games marathons we've ever seen. If you look back at the winning times over recent years, the last title, well, there was only a second between the gold and silver medalists 4 years ago when Al Hassan Mahboub of Bahrain won in 2:12.38. 2:11 winning time in 2:10. Mubarak Shami when he won in the heat of Doha 12 years ago, 2:12.44. Lee Bongju, his back-to-back wins in 98 and 2002. One of them was a slow one, 2:14. But you've got to go back 40 years and more before we've had a slower Asian Games marathon than this. And one thing that these pictures don't communicate to you at home is just how oppressive the heat and the humidity is. Even starting at 6 in the morning, that was out of necessity. It really is fierce out there. You spend 10, 15 minutes in, there's never quite direct sunshine here, but when the sun starts burning through the haze, it is fierce. And these men are starting to suffer from that now. And bear in mind, they've been on their feet now running but just what, 40 odd seconds short of 2 hours.
A really tough way to become an Asian Games champion. And there are still 5 men very much in the hunt. A look of intense concentration on the faces of both men from Japan. Hayato Sonoda has led for about the last 20 odd minutes. He's been the one setting the tone. Hiroto Inui has never displayed a flicker of emotion. Not quite running on his toes. Still a front foot strike. He still looks good. And the very young, very talented Bahrainian Abdi Abdo has come through what must have been an attack of cramp. Suddenly lost touch with the leaders, but managed to reattach himself. What about the man from China? Just running on the left of picture with his cap. Giving himself an opportunity to finish on the podium for what would be a great moment for him. And the ever grimacing El Abbasi of Bahrain represented Morocco until 5 years ago. It's only his second marathon. He ran just a shade inside 2:11 when he finished second in Lisbon at the back end of last year. His head's rocking and rolling and he's grimacing, but he's still there, unlike so many others.
Yes, Duo Bougie. We haven't seen too much of him, really. He's run a very quiet race, but he's never been anything but in that leading group. You can see him on the right there with the white peak cap. He's certainly done nothing wrong so far, but it's Sonoda who's doing the work here for his teammate. I don't think he's necessarily consciously doing it for his teammate, but he might as well be. And now there's another kick from Sonoda. He's gone to the front. He's trying to break the leading group. And once again, you can see at the back, El Abbasi certainly appears to miss the first run at it. He's changing direction here, is El Abbasi. Moving over there to the fountain. That's ahead of us. 2 of them opting to go through. Duo is the other.
I would have thought all 5 men would run under that in these brutal conditions, but El Abbasi clearly feeling he desperately needed a cooling shower, and it looks as though, with a little expression of pain on his face, Sonoda discards the cap, still forcing the pace at the front. I think the second Japanese athlete, if we look at Inui as the favourite, 4.77. I think Sonoda is determined not to let this come down to a sprint. That is his best chance of getting a medal, and he's really feeling the effects of having forced the pace. You can see it in his face.
Yeah, from time to time. Oh, and now we've lost him again. And I wonder if that's cramp or simply the effects of the race for Abdi Abdo, because quite dramatically, he's dropped off the leading group again. And perhaps that was inevitable, because it's very, very rare in an event like this that you get a cramp in a lower limb, and it doesn't come back sooner rather than later. And I get a sense it has now happened. And also Duo's beginning to feel the effects, and the movements at the front, and look who's doing it. Who would have thought it? El Abbasi switching over to the other side of the road and then looking across to Inui. And the race now is really on. They're through 2 hours. They're into the last 12 minutes or so. They've got less than 3 miles to go. And 2 men are away. And it's all happened in little more than the bat of an eyelid.
Amazing transformation. And even more incredibly, look at the way El Abbasi is wasting energy, veering from left to right. He clearly wants to run on his own. He doesn't want Inui for company. Inui now coming back across towards the right-hand side, but that's a really wasteful use of energy at a key stage of the race. But how about this? The man who's grimaced and has hung on to the leading group is now setting the pace, but Inui is on his shoulder like a shadow.
Well, those are the tactics, Rob, that you tend to associate with the high bank in the velodrome. You know those moments when the bikes, they're up there right at the top of the banking and they're looking at one another? That's almost as if what El Abbasi was doing. He's trying to invite the Japanese runner Inui just to come inside, go in front. But Inui, his tactics are clear. He's sitting there in the wake of the Bahrainian. He's not going to move until he believes the moment is absolutely right for him to go on and take the title.
We've spoken at great length about Inui. El Abbasi, former track specialist, has come through the ranks. Asian Games champion over 10,000 metres 4 years ago. He was 21st in the World Half Marathon Championships in Valencia at the end of March and 15th in the World Cross Country Championships in Guiyang. I covered that, and the conditions were tough 3 years ago. A great race won by Jeffrey Kipsang Kamworor.
And the lesson from that, Rob, is that we know he's versatile. He's good across the country. He's got a track pedigree. He will have decent leg speed. Looking at the way that Inui runs, you have to think that when he has to, this man can produce more leg speed than the Bahrainian. But it's very easy to talk of that when these men have been running for more than 2 hours in utterly punishing heat and humidity. But now, for the first time, Inui has gone to the front. Now, this could prove to be the decisive moment in the race. If Inui can't break him now, suddenly that will lift the spirits of El Abbasi. He'll think, hang on, the Japanese looks great, but he can't be feeling too good. There's a chance for me here. And suddenly the complexion of the race will change. And there's no doubt here, Inui at the moment can't shrug him off.
I think that's in his mind. He knows El Abbasi has track speed, has strength in his legs from cross country, and is a little bit of an unknown quantity when it comes to marathons because he's only run one when he was second in Lisbon last year. He is wasting quite a lot of energy looking around. He's no longer veering left to right. And what an immense battle is unfolding just out of shot for the bronze between Sonoda and Duo of China. It was an incredible break. As soon as Abdo felt the effects of whatever it was that was causing him, and it must have been a cramp, you suspect, as soon as Abdo left that 5 and drifted off the back, there was an injection of pace. And there, for the very first time in the race, not only is he now leading for the first time, that's the first time he's looked over his shoulder. It's almost as if he's inviting the Bahrainian to come through on his inside. This is fascinating. It's a duel in the sun, in baking heat, with searing humidity. And it's happening not just for the gold, but for the bronze as well. The real pressure for the battle between Sonoda and Duo is that the one who wins that battle gets on the podium. The one who doesn't finishes in that agonising position of 4th. Inui and El Abbasi look as though they're going to share gold and silver. It will simply be a question of which way round. Inui will see this as his chance of Asian Games history and his chance to be the first Japanese champion since 1986.
Well, Inui finds himself at the front again. And this time it's El Abbasi who, if he chooses, can sit in the wake of the Japanese. But he's almost pushing there on his left shoulder as if to say, look, I'm still here. I'm a hard man. It's going to take a lot to shrug me off. And it's so proving for Inui. And now he's going again. There is certainly an effort now. Can the Bahrainian respond to this? Inui's not quite throwing everything into this, but this is certainly his bid for victory.
I think his form and his cadence here indicate that he does not want this to come down to a sprint as they close in on the stadium. What a shock it would be if El Abbasi managed to beat by far the fastest man in the field. His face doesn't give much away, Inui, but this is his bid for glory. And once again, as we've seen him do a couple of times in the race, El Abbasi just shaking out those arms. He's been continually and repeatedly looking at his watch. He's got to hang on here, and at the moment he's doing a great job of doing so. Fascinating climax in prospect here in brutal conditions in Jakarta.
It's no doubt who's hurting the most. It's El Abbasi. But he appears to have an incredible pain threshold. Inui's tried twice now, and he hasn't broken him. And now the Bahrainian is moving to the front. And he's just looking across to say, Inui, well, is that the best you've got? What else have you got left in the locker? Because believe me, I've got a huge heart. And now, Inui, for a moment there, threatening to go to the front. And then the cadence drops again.
This is why marathons are so good to watch. Two men side by side who have poured their hearts and soul out onto the streets of the Indonesian capital, and there is still nothing to separate them. Side by side in their battle for Asian Games glory. What a race this is turning out to be. A contrast of styles. Two men who are closing in on what would, for both of them, be the biggest moment of their career. And we still don't know who is going to become the Asian Games Marathon Champion for 2018. Different body types, different cadence. El Abbasi has grimaced his way round the course. Inui, in contrast, has floated his way round. But Inui will not be taking this for granted. He knows the Bahrainian is a class act. He has weathered his various storms as he hung on grimly to that group of 8, and he's gasping for air, but he's still there, and Inui glances over. He cannot rid himself of the Bahrainian yet. What's he got to do to get his hands on this gold medal? He's got to find something else.
And they are just running in formation here, shoulder to shoulder. They've been going for more than 2 hours and 11 minutes. Still got 2 kilometres remaining. It's going to be an incredibly slow time. Although, as Rob has said, when it comes to championship marathons, and particularly in conditions like this, that is the 40-kilometre point. There's no doubt that those conditions have dictated the race. Both men taking water aboard. It'll be over the head in a moment. There it is. It's the last 7 minutes or so of racing. It has been a negative split. It will be a faster second half. But it will be one of the slowest Asian Games marathons we've ever seen. Perhaps for 50 years. This is the race for the bronze medal. Sonoda of Japan. Behind him, Duo of China. But now, Rob, well, in the distance, on a straight stretch of road, they can just about catch the two leaders, but they've dropped back quite a margin.
They have. As soon as Abdo disappeared off the back of the pace, we had that battle for bronze emerging, and there's nothing to separate them either. Two great stories unfolding here, with a little over 4 laps of a track separating one of these men from the title. They will begin to think about this last desperate push for glory. 3/4 of a lap inside the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium. Will they both enter and emerge from the shadow of the tunnel still locked together with 300 metres to go? That would be an agonising way to lose an Asian Games title. And look at this from Inui. He is desperate to avoid a sprint finish, and still, every time he asks the question, thus far, the Bahrainian is coming up with an answer. They're miles clear of the two men battling for bronze. This is truly fascinating here.
And you may have seen a couple of moments ago, they went round what was virtually a hairpin turn. That's the last thing a marathon runner wants with less than 2 kilometres remaining. The Bahrainian laboured round it. At that point, Inui thought, right, now is the time to kick on. Now is time for my third kick to finally break him. He tried and he failed. And now, again, it's almost the cycling tactics again. For the 4th time, Inui eases down on the accelerator. Pain etched across the face of the Bahrainian, but still he's there. He's sticking to him like glue.
That was the biggest drive we've seen yet from Inouye to try and get away from the Bahrainian. And for the very first time, the face that tells you nothing is now etched in pain. Hiroto Inouye may have been the favourite for this race. He may have come in here as the fastest man in the field by quite some margin on paper. But he really is going to have to earn this gold medal. And what about this battle for bronze? Hayato Sonoda still cannot shake off the long, loping, grimacing stride of Duo Buji. Twice he's finished fifth in the Asian Championships over 5,000 metres. Now the Japanese man desperate to open up a couple of metres. It's a mirror of the battle going on for the gold. Only one of them is going to stand atop the podium. They are both absolutely shattered. Look at the number of people lining the course here in Jakarta. A brilliantly supported event and a brilliantly supported race at just gone 8:15 on a Saturday morning. Those who have got out of bed early are witnessing one of the great duels in Asian Games marathon history. It might not be the quickest, but this is absolutely fascinating. They've poured their hearts and souls into this race, and we still don't know which man is going to take the glory.
Well, you do wonder if the last 2 or 3 kilometres have been marathon running's rope-a-dope, because Inouye has landed several heavy blows. But each time, El Abbasi's come back, yet he's not really responding other than surviving. Is he timing that final run for the last 600 metres or so? And will that be the knockout blow from the former Moroccan, who simply will not lie down? He will not take the count.
Well, El Abbasi is the man who has better track speed and track history. Is that going to play a major role as we edge towards the climax of the race here? You get the feeling that the closer they get to the finish, the more the Bahrainian fancies it. And here he goes, gritting his teeth, grimacing. He's about to go under the shadow of the stadium, and this is his bid for glory. But Inouye is managing to hang on. And is there a little touch of cramp there for the Bahrainian?
Well, they're into the complex of the GBK Sports Facility. The big stadium ahead of them. Into the tunnel in the next few strides. And then out into the light of the stadium. Well, in the end, it's going to be a track race. Each one has tried, each one has separately failed.
Incredible drama here in the men's marathon. After 26.1 miles, they're entering the stadium together. They have poured their hearts and soul into this race. El Abbasi, the unfancied of the two, still hanging on. The former track champion glancing over his shoulder. Does that give you an indication that he's struggling here? Hiroto Inouye started as the pre-race favourite, but he wouldn't have anticipated sharing the stage this late on with the Bahrainian, who still looks as though he's capable. It's a sprint finish here in the marathon. Unbelievable. You could be forgiven for thinking this is a 1500, but it isn't. A clash there. Inouye is coming away. He is going to become the Asian Games champion. Japan's first gold in this event since 1986. An amazing silver for El Hassan El Abbasi. He was clipped by the Japanese man towards the end of the race. What a finish. You will never see a more dramatic marathon than that. Absolutely superb.
But I tell you what, El Abbasi's not happy, because there's no doubt he was looking to come down the inside of Inouye, which in itself is perhaps a tactical error, because in some respects the athlete does have the entitlement to move to the curb. But El Abbasi was looking to squeeze between Inouye and the curb, and I do wonder if that was a telling moment.
Well, there may be a protest. By the way, it was Duobuji who won that battle for bronze. Heartache there for Hayato Sonoda, the man who split the field at 30k. It did look as though the Bahrainian was coming through on the inside. There he is on the right. He has the momentum. To be fair, they both gave each other a shove. That's hard to call, isn't it? It would be unprecedented for someone to be disqualified in a marathon this close to the finish. It'll be an interesting one for the judges. It did look as though the Bahrainian was coming through, but he gave as good as he got. He made the first shove and therefore was trying to go through a gap that perhaps wasn't quite there.
Well, I think the gap was there, and there's no doubt Inouye steps in. However, I think it would take a very brave judge to disqualify, because that's what it would be. It wouldn't be reversing the positions, it would be disqualification.
It would be interesting if we got a chance to see that again. It was very tight. It did look as though the former track champion from 2014 had the momentum on the inside. However, he was also pushing as well as being pushed. But
I think the greatest relevance is, and the greatest defence for Inouye, is that the Bahrainian was trying to get down the inside. Inouye, there's no doubt, was moving across, and there's no doubt that either deliberately or instinctively he was seeking to close that gap. Had it been a case where the Bahrainian had come on his outside and then the Japanese had drifted across and impeded him, then I think it would be a clear case. When you can maybe argue he was just trying to take the curb with maybe less than an entire lane's width, then the Bahrainian did have to rather accept what was going to happen. It's a very difficult one, and it's such a massive call if a judge, because you can see there that he's unhappy. And we're going to look at it again. He drifts across, there's no doubt about that. Look at that. He's come from the edge or outside or even the lane line to cut across him, which is why now we see this again. He's right on the outside of the lane. Look at him come across here. Look where his feet go. He's moved inside. There's no doubt about that. The issue the judge must consider is, was the Bahrainian entitled to go for that gap?
And also,
it's a big, big call to make.
And also, watching that replay, Martin, Inouye obviously thought he was close enough to the inside. He glanced with his eyes twice, not left, but right. He was expecting El Abbasi to come on his outside. He could sense he was there. I'm not sure whether we will get a chance to see that one more time. His eyes flicked to the right, not to the left.
Yeah, the massive call, Rob, is that were the judge to do anything, it's not about reversing gold and silver. You've got to disqualify him, and that's a huge call to make here. So, whilst I think my thought is that Inouye did impede him, it would take, in my view, an exceedingly brave judge to make a decision that changes that result.
And I wonder if it does stand, and I would agree with you. I suspect it will stand, because it's a gigantic story if they suddenly disqualify Inouye, as we see Bhattacharya coming past Ri Kang Bom. I wonder whether we're going to see another sprint finish. I wonder whether El Abbasi, in the fullness of time, will think, if only I'd tried to go on his outside.
Yeah.
He saw half a gap, which he tried to force into a full gap. Another sprint finish here. Bhattacharya had gone past the man from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and he's coming back again. Another sprint finish. Amazing drama here. Photo finish. Bhattacharya just, I think, from the man from Korea.
He's a hard man, isn't he? Look at that. Looking as fresh as a daisy as well. Yes, just to go back to that incident, you're taking a risk when you try to go for a gap between the leader and the curb. You are. And to a degree, you must accept what happens to you. See, this is and I put this in inverted commas, a more honest sprint finish. The man who fancies his chances has gone wide, and he's beaten him for pace down the outside. Here we see it again. Yeah, he's just waiting for him to come, isn't he? And then he senses he's there on the inside, notices him, and quite clearly, if you follow his feet, he cut across. There's no doubt about that. So he was impeded. Whether it ultimately impacted on the result, we don't absolutely know. Secondly, was he partially entitled to go for the curb because he was ahead anyway? Question mark. 3, in practicality, it's a massive decision to make.
It's huge. It's 32 years of history for Japan. As Tony Payne comes across the line, perhaps paying the price for rejoining that lead group. Inui clearly feels he is going to remain the Asian Games marathon champion. Incredible drama at the end of 26.2 miles.
And who would have thought, Rob, at the start of this morning, at 6 o'clock this morning, 21 entries, a whole range. He's still unhappy. And I feel sympathy for him. And I think anybody who's watching could have sympathy. If it was at all possible, we would have avoided that incident. Because that will perhaps, in some discussions, come to characterise the outcome. Certainly the gold and silver medalists. Whether it did ultimately decide, I do not know. But who would have thought, Rob, at the start of this morning, 21 athletes, 42.2 kilometres, a whole range of abilities, that it would actually come down to a massive sprint finish and a bit of elbows in the last 50 metres.
Well, I think I might have even said, as it happened, you could have been watching the end of an 800 metres. It was, it was that close. Absolutely amazing. This, I think, is Andrei Petrov, by the way, who ran 2:15 in Seoul from Uzbekistan. Coming home here. Glancing up at the scoreboard. But one of the most dramatic marathons you could ever see. It was absolutely incredible. Coming through the finish. Just a shade inside 2:27, which in these conditions is not a bad time. It's not what you'd expect in a big city marathon. In a big city marathon, he'd be 30th or 40th probably. But that's how much it's taken out of the Uzbekistani. He is absolutely shattered. Even though these men are used to this kind of weather, that was brutal.
So we are going to stay with this field through to the finish. 21 athletes having started. There is a stunning complex. We're right at the heart of Jakarta. And here's one of the men who was with the leading group for quite a while. Wearing 267. Pak Choi. He was the first of the Koreans to drop from that leading group. Ri Kang-bom was there for rather longer. We will at some point be able to bring you the official results from the leading 10 athletes. But for each and every one of these men, it has been a long, long morning. They got underway about 2.5 hours ago. At 6 o'clock, within the main stadium where the track and field program gets underway very shortly. Just to mark your card on that, the first event on will be the men's multi-event, the decathlon heats of the 100 metres going off at 10 o'clock local time, so in round about 90 minutes time. But there's a healthy gathering here to welcome home the marathon runners, not just the medalists, but those who have braved what have been very demanding conditions. High heat and humidity. And Pak Choi, entirely understandably, down there on all fours. It has been a painful experience. Good to see plenty of assistance in the wings. Well, we saw him at the front for quite a while. Here he is, Ilya Tyapkin. Now into the complex. He'll be looking at the main stadium ahead of him. Just a couple more turns and then in through the tunnel. And that final 350 metres or so inside the stadium. The clock ticking beyond 2.5 hours. Yes, there is a facility. You could just see the aquatic centre over to the left. So, Tyapkin. Just the last 320 or 30 metres to go now. It's painful. It's been hard. But you'd like to think at the end of the day, he will conclude that it's been worth it. So, Ilya Tyapkin. Yes, just to mark your card about what's coming up on the track. There is a lull after the marathon runners finish here, but we are in action with the main feature of the morning will be the heats of the men's 400 metres. They get underway at 11:10 local time, so in around about 2.5 hours. The first three disciplines of the men's multi-event, the decathlon, the 100 metres, the long jump, and the shot, which will round off the morning programme. It is also the day of the first track final, the men's 10,000 metres. That is the centrepiece, or should I say the women's 10,000 metres, which is indeed the centrepiece of this evening's track and field programme. So coming through in just outside 2:32, Ilya Tyapkin. It really is an outstanding facility, originally constructed for that Asian Games back in 1962, which has certainly been well and truly spruced up ahead of this event. Well, that is welcome. Those legs will be burning. Now back running again, good to see that. There are one or two others. Well, we saw Kim Jae-yoon there earlier on. He was part of the leading group, but clearly suffering cramps to the back of the hamstring. And that, I suspect, is where Kim Jae-yoon would rather be. Duo Buji of China. Enjoying, if that's the right word. That'll be a sort of impromptu ice bath. So, Kim. Into the GBK Park. The main stadium ahead of him. Well, we're going to focus on that finish again. And you could see there looking down how Inouye was looking for Alabashi to come down his outside. Then sensed him coming between him and the curb. And there's no doubt he closed that gap. Now that is the controversial moment in the last 100 metres of this marathon. No doubt that Alabashi's emotions really a balance of disappointment and perhaps even a sense of injustice. So, Kim Jae-hoon hobbling into the stadium, feeling the niggles behind the back of his right hamstring. Little over 300 meters to go. Oh, and he stopped again. It is back, and this time, well, it is the hamstring. You can see him feeling high there in the right hamstring. Having come this far, he's desperate to finish. But 42.2 kilometers in these conditions, taking its toll. The winner's time, you can see there, 2:18.22. That a little more than 17 minutes ago now.
Third position, enter the track area.
So, Kim Jae-hoon, having got through his troubles over the course of the last 2 or 3 kilometers, does get to the finish. Well done to him. And also into the stadium, that's Sanchai Namket of Thailand. His finishing time going to be just outside, 2 hours and 37. He too suffering a few problems there with the right leg, just cramping up as he comes through the finish. Congratulations to Sanchai Namket. That's a very bold effort, just outside 2:37. Takes a huge amount, not just strong body, but also mind and character to get through on a day like today. You can see some problems there. That's Parky of Nepal just being helped away. And I must say, these a few of the rather more concerning images from out there on the road. This looks rather like the Kyrgyzstani there, Kashjabekov. And now we have confirmation of that result. Hiroto Inui is the champion for Japan. El Hassan El Abbasi, given the same time in the silver medal position, 2:18.22. Duo Buji of China came through for the bronze there in 2:18.48. And Hayato Sanada, who did so much of the hard work in the last 10 kilometers or so, well, I'm afraid he will return home without any form of medal reward. He finishes there in 4th place. Well, athletes in a state of great discomfort out there, but still anxious to be able to get to the finish. So there is Kishtabekov. Well, the encouragement coming from the side of the road. So we understand we do just have Kushtebekov and one more athlete still out there on the road, and we'll bring them home. Well, there we are, wearing 574, that's Shin Kwan-sik, the Korean. And the ambulance following him home. He, the last runner on the road at the moment. Well, these will be the enduring images as we look back on this marathon. Even for athletes of this sort of quality, on a day like today, in these sort of conditions, it is a very, very demanding run. So, Shin Kwan-sik of Korea. Well, you can see the GBK sporting facility up ahead of him to the right. The last man remaining on the road. Kushtebekov up, oh dear. Well, it's high up in the quads, I think, isn't it? The cramp setting in. And those muscles just don't want to work for him. He's desperate to finish. And he'll try and get going again. Meanwhile, further up on the road, here is Kushtebekov. The Kyrgyzstani. But he's certainly running a lot more easily than he was a little bit earlier. The clock moving on a little bit towards 2 hours 45 minutes. The winner having gone through in 2:18:22. And if you are just joining us, the champion in rather dramatic and in the end slightly controversial circumstances, Hiroto Inui, involved in an incredible sprint down the home straight, just denying the Bahraini and the former Moroccan El Hassan Al Abbasi. Both given the same time, but Inui, the champion. So gingerly, Adilet Kushtebekov. Turning in here and towards the GBK main stadium. Shin Kwan-sik is up and running again. That's good to see. Well, the cramp setting in again. Oh, and this time it's the left hamstring. Well, this is turning into more of a tale of human endeavour than it is an athletics race. Look at the encouragement from the side of the road. Every chance that those two people don't even know one another. But he's getting just about all the encouragement he needs. He's up and going again, is Shin. Well, Kushtabekov about to enter the arena. There it is, up ahead of him. It is painful to watch, isn't it? A very fine athlete. Reduced to little more than a jog. A combination of the event, 42.2 kilometres, 26 miles and 385 yards, the classic distance. But the real killer here, the climate, the humidity, really so testing. The temperatures into the low 30s. So Adalet Kushtabekov of Kyrgyzstan sees the light of the stadium in front of him, and he will now know that he's inside the final 400 metres.
Ladies and gentlemen, entering the track area.
So enthusiastic applause. The crowd over there on the main straight.
In 14th position, from Kyrgyzstan.
The last 250 metres for the Kyrgyzstani. His time is going to be very, very close to 2 hours 50. Well, once again, cramp bringing him to a halt, and this time it's the left hamstring. And when that strikes, there's nothing you can do about it apart from try to stretch it out, wait for it to ease off. But he must feel now there's a real chance he might not even be able to finish. Well, he's getting some assistance. Just trying to ease off the cramp there behind the left hamstring. He's within 200 metres of the finish. Well, there will be a round of applause the moment Kushtebekov starts putting one foot in front of the other. It's purely and simply that left hamstring has stopped working. Meanwhile, still going. He's had his troubles time and again. Shin Kwan-sik, the Korean. The last man on the road. And Kushtebekov still no closer to the finish line. Well, he will be desperate to get a finishing time here. And just what that time is at the moment, well, it's largely irrelevant. It's all about just getting through the finish. And Adelet Kushtebekov is back up and jogging again. 170 meters remaining. In all likelihood, he will be the penultimate finisher. Shin Kwang-sik still out on the road, but looking rather better than he was a few minutes ago. So Adelet Kushtebekov, 33 minutes or so after the champion came through, has himself finished. And just jogging through to try and prevent that left hamstring from cramping up again. So just one man left standing. Shin Kwang-sik. Well, he's getting all the attention now from the side of the road. His mission purely and simply now to get to the finish. He's very close now to the GBK sporting facility. He'll turn through the gates fairly shortly and towards the main stadium. Just a few more twists and turns. And looking rather more relaxed than he was certainly 10 or 15 minutes ago. So the main stadium right in front of him. And into the tunnel is inside the last 400 meters. The final finisher here in the marathon on this opening morning of track and field competition. Action on the track. Well, that starts in around about 1 hour's time with the opening discipline of the men's multi-event, the decathlon. So Shin Kwan-sik, an almost cathedral silence. Although when he gets to the top bend, there will be, I'm sure, some very polite applause from those who've waited on to welcome him home. So into the last 100 metres or so. Shin Kwan-sik of Korea is our final finisher in the marathon. He's had his trials, particularly over the last 5 or 10 kilometres, but he's got to the finish. Remarkable effort. Well done to him. Good to see all the medical assistants arriving. Ice for the limbs, drinks for the mouth, and those muscles are pretty much cramped up. Though even at this stage he seems fairly keen, does Kim, to get out under his own steam. So here are the results from this morning's men's marathon, and what a story it was. What a dramatic conclusion. A sprint finish and a little bit of controversy, but in the end it's Hiroto Inui who came here as the favourite. The Japanese takes the title. It's our first Japanese winner of the marathon for 3 decades. Very tight for second place, and when you consider we only had 21 starters here, we've had a remarkably high number of finishers in conditions which have been very, very tough indeed. High humidity, high temperatures. It has been utterly demanding. There we go. Shin coming through in 15th spot. 6 men did fail to get to the finish. They included Abdi Abdo, who was going so well there until he started picking up those cramps. Looked to me like bottom of the calf, maybe high up on the Achilles. He, for a moment, did appear as if he might be a possible champion. Well, it all got underway before most people had got up this morning. 6 o'clock. Fairly soon, we had a leading group of 8 who got away. And in them, 2 Chinese, 2 Japanese. And there was Serod Batochir, who's almost run 50 marathons in his career. He eventually finished out of the medals. But while all others were testing at the front of the pack, that man there, Hiroto Inui, was lurking and waiting to make his challenge. And in the end, it became a duel between Anui and Elshan El Abassi of Bahrain. They came together shoulder to shoulder. They came elbow to elbow up the home straight. But in the end, it was Anui who got there, and it is he who took the prize. Well, that's it from the marathon. We have the women's race tomorrow, the track program getting underway in that stadium in less than an hour. From Rob Walker and myself, Martin Gillingham, bye-bye.
AIS Play รวมความบันเทิงคุณภาพ เปิดความสนุกทุกที่ทุกเวลา
ส่งต่อความมั่นใจ สู้ไปด้วยกันนะครับ